That wasn't the gavel. That is. Right, good morning. Can I welcome our members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the London Assembly Transport Committee. The main item for today is a question and answer session with the TfL Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor for Transport. It's our last meeting of the year, so we asked them lots of questions on lots of different topics today. Can you all please make sure your electronic devices are switched off or on silent mode? And can I then start by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies for absence, but Assembly members McCartney and Desai will be joining us slightly late today.
Thank you very much. And can I ask the members of the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if you have any other interests to declare? None. Thank you very much. Can we also note the ongoing actions arising from the previous meetings of the committee in part 3 of the agenda? And part 4 is, can we note the response from the Minister for Roads and Local Transport to our letter on Transport for London's funding settlement? Noted. Great. So then we can move swiftly on to our main item of business, which is our question and answer session at the end of the year with the TfL Commissioner and Deputy Mayor for Transport. So we're joined in the chamber today by Andy Lord, who is the TfL Commissioner, and Seb Dance, who is the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Welcome. Thank you both for joining us. We have lots of questions for you, but before we start, I'd like to invite the Commissioner to say a few opening remarks, if that's all right. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, perhaps if the Deputy Mayor could go first, if that be acceptable.
Apologies, I thought we'd arranged the order in advance. Deputy Mayor, would you like to give us a few opening remarks for a few minutes?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for the opportunity to give a few opening remarks this morning. I've been in post now for just over a year. Time doesn't really mean very much in this role, but it's been a great honour, and I note that the committee spared me the chance to appear before you last year when I'd been in post for just a few weeks, but I'm very pleased to be here today alongside Andy Lord. At my confirmation hearing, I said that London is the best place in the world, and I could think of no greater honour than to serve this city. And certainly in the 14 months that have passed since then, none of that eagerness has waned. In fact, my position has become ever more resolute. I want to say that London is not only the best place in the world, but its transport system is the envy of the world. And I know firsthand that our city's transport workers are some of the most passionate, dedicated people that I've ever had the privilege of working with. Because, of course, in many ways, the last 12 months represents the culmination of many, many years of hard work and careful planning. In some cases, of course, many decades. It's a demonstration of what long-term, steady and sustained investment can deliver. We closed and reopened the entire bank branch of the Northern Line, bored a new railway tunnel, built a new concourse and opened a new entrance at Bank Station. We finished building and opened an extension of the London Overground at Barking Riverside. And of course, we opened the Elizabeth Line, an engineering feat, and the impact it has had on the capital and of course beyond speaks for itself. It was a real honour to be at Paddington with Her late Majesty for the ceremonial opening of the line named in her honour, and to see firsthand the extraordinary efforts put in by staff across the network, preparing for the planned event, of course, the Platinum Jubilee, and the sad unplanned event, well, not it was planned, but the sadly not anticipated event of Her Majesty's passing. The negotiations with government about funding are well documented, and of course both the Mayor and I were determined to stand up for London and to fight for our transport network, which so many Londoners and businesses rely on. And I'm very grateful to Andy and his team and his colleagues for their tireless work to secure that agreement in the summer. The deal is far from perfect, but of course we can now move away from the threat of managed decline to London's transport network. As a result of this deal, TfL now has greater funding certainty and can get on with the job at hand, whether that be delivering on the bus action plan launched last year or investing in active travel infrastructure to support, among other things, TfL's own cycle hire scheme, which last year marked its busiest ever. Time would not allow me to list everything that's happened over the last 12 months. The new DLR timetable, the full reopening of the night tube, the continued decarbonisation of the bus fleet, or indeed the delivery of more step-free access at stations across the underground network. And these are just some of the examples of the extraordinary work that takes place across TfL every day, where those who work in the service of our city are motivated not just by improving the public transport system, but the lives and livelihoods of everyone who use it. I should point out that yesterday's IPCC report demonstrates the scale of what we face. And the transport system is not simply about delivering buses and trains and trams and a whole range of options for people to get from A to B, vital, of course, though that is. It is about the type of city that we want to live in, the type of city that we will leave to our children and their children, and the scale and challenge of policy that is before us demands ambition, and it demands long-term thinking. I speak today as the Deputy Mayor of Transport and Deputy Chair of this great organisation, and I couldn't be prouder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. So, Commissioner, would you like to follow up with some remarks of your own?
Please. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to take questions from you today. I'd like to start by expressing how honoured I am to be leading this fantastic organisation with such incredible history and heritage, and also incredibly proud of the tremendous effort that all of our colleagues across TfL make day in, day out to ensure that our services run smoothly, safely and efficiently as possible, and that we continue to deliver for Londoners. The Deputy Mayor has spoken about the many recent achievements, and I am immensely proud of what everyone at TfL has achieved, but I want to take a forward look. Our new business plan, published in December, maps our plans to 2025-26. After the years of the pandemic, it's the first business plan in 3 years, sets us back on course to delivering for London, delivering healthy streets and healthy people, delivering a good public transport experience, and supporting the delivery of new homes and jobs across our great city. I have set 4 clear priorities for TfL going forward to ensure that we continue to support the capital's economic recovery, becoming the strong green heartbeat of London, while achieving operational financial sustainability in the financial year 2023-2024. I want our colleagues in TfL to be excited about our vision and to know the role that they play in its delivery as we work to become a simpler, more diverse and more inclusive organisation. We want to be an organisation that invests in our people, in their welfare and their facilities to ensure that TfL remains an attractive place to work. I also want to continue attracting customers back to our services in greater numbers and to keep improving the experience that they have. Transport enables economic activity and opportunity, and greater passenger numbers will mean a more prosperous, thriving city, something that I'm sure all of the committee share with my thoughts and desires on that. To continue encouraging and welcoming customers back to our network, we have plans to further invest in our infrastructure, keeping our services safe, clean and reliable. This includes investment in the development of new trains to replace the ageing Piccadilly line fleet, and the new fleet of trains for the DLR, alongside an upgraded fleet on the Central line. We must also ensure TfL is a financially sustainable organisation. Our agreement with government sees us through to March 2024, and although it isn't perfect, the agreement has enabled us to progress our work after a prolonged period of uncertainty. And we are very grateful for the government for the funding that we've received. We will achieve and build on that financial sustainability, actively growing passenger demand while creating new sources of revenue to reduce our reliance on fares income. The crucial thing now is for the government to give us the certainty over the capital funding we will need going forward. Every major transport system around the world requires some form of government capital investment, and we are absolutely no exception. With it, we can achieve great things for London, as demonstrated by the many projects that have come to conclusion in the last year or so, and deliver great benefit for the UK. Without it, further very difficult choices will lay ahead and economic growth will be constrained. Finally, my team and I are absolutely committed to accelerating our contribution to London becoming a net zero carbon city by 2030. TfL has a vital role to play in our transition to becoming carbon neutral, and this will be a key focus and priority for me as Commissioner. The year ahead will see the delivery of the London-wide ultra-low emission zone to further tackle the triple challenges of air pollution, the climate emergency and congestion. We've also committed additional funding to embed action on the environment in our work, including to cut and adapt to the impacts of climate change on London's public transport network. I look forward to answering your questions today and working with you all going forward throughout the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, we'll have questions on most of those issues coming up in the meeting today. But first, I would like to extend our welcome to members of the Youth Safety Campaign from Sarah Bonnell School in Stratford, who are here in the public gallery today. Hello. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Now, you've sent through to us a campaigning ask, a request for a question to be asked of the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor. So we're very happy to do that, and I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember Baker to ask the question. It fits into our first section of questions, which is safety.
Thank you. Yes, because this is specifically about buses. We were going to raise it under the section on buses, which will come later, but we're happy to push it up front so you can see. And so the issue that we're going to raise from representations from the young people, particularly in Newham, is around young people who forget their zip card, and they've explained to us how dangerous it can be if they're not able to get on the bus through no fault of their own. Left them at home. So they're really concerned that although in theory there should be provision to allow vulnerable passengers onto the bus, and the Red Book outlines that includes young people, that in practice maybe drivers aren't seeing them as vulnerable and therefore aren't actually using that ability to let them on, especially when they're in uniform. They're clearly eligible. So we're looking either to amend, if needed, the Red Book, the guidance for drivers, or to, as part of training, roll out clarification that young people in uniform should always be considered as effectively vulnerable and be allowed to ride if they do temporarily forget their zip card. Is that something that you can consider or that we can meet further on?
Thank you for the question. I mean, first of all, clearly, safety of everybody on our network is an absolute priority, particularly children, women and girls. It is absolutely our procedure that bus drivers should take a pragmatic and sensible view if a young person does not have their pass with them, and I would hope that they will all do that. I will absolutely take it away to see if we need to enhance and review the training and the procedures for our bus operators so that they can ensure that all our bus drivers take a sensible and pragmatic approach. Clearly, I would encourage everybody using our network to make sure they do have their travel pass with them, but on the rare occasion where they don't, I would absolutely expect our bus drivers to take a sensible and pragmatic decision with regard to any young person using the network, and as I say, we'll happily take the action to review that with all our bus operators.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember Baker, and thank you again to the young people for bringing that question. It's a really important issue. So now we'll move on to our planned questions. We've got initially some questions on Vision Zero and road danger reduction and enforcement. And I just wanted to ask a question at the beginning in relation to Dame Louise Casey's report today. There is a very clear conclusion in that there are issues with the remoteness of the Pan-London specialist teams, particularly she names the middle ground units like the Violent Crime Task Force, and the remoteness they have from local policing, contributing to a toxic culture. Now, I can't find it mentioned by name anywhere in the report, but the Roads and Transport Policing Command is funded by TfL and under your supervision somewhat. So I wanted to ask, have you asked anyone or looked into it yourself about the culture within the Roads and Transport Policing Command? Because we have had this situation where officers from that command went to the Violent Crime Task Force for a time, and I would hate to think they'd brought back any kind of toxic culture. Have you been looking into that, and if not, will you do so?
So first off, I haven't read the Casey report and review, but obviously the report is quite shocking and horrendous, and we will, as an executive, review the report and see if there's any actions that we need to be taking from a TfL perspective. We clearly have a very close relationship with all the police partners that we work with, BTP, City of London, and the Met, and of course, obviously, some of the forces outside of the London boundary as well. You're quite right, Chair, that we do fund the Road Traffic Policing Command. I'm not aware of any issues, but I will absolutely take it away in light of this report and ensure that we have an appropriate review with the Met Police to see if there are any specific findings in the report that relate to that unit, and nonetheless ensure that we're kept up to speed with any actions that the Met feel they need to take as a result that are relevant to the services they provide for TfL.
Okay, thank you very much. And Seb, I mean, did you have any conversations at the scoping stage to include that unit within the scope of Dame Louise Casey's review?
Yes, so no, not. We haven't been involved in the review. That's purely a matter for Dame Casey. But what clearly this review shows and shines a light on. Well, it's a difficult day for policing, obviously, but it shines a necessary light on appalling practices that have been taking place. And clearly, we will want reassurance going forward that covers all elements of policing, including, of course, road and transport, and ensuring that action that is taken looks at all the different layers of policing, and that we have confidence in the different aspects of the Met's operation. It's a very complicated organisation, the Met, obviously, and there will be a lot of fallout from this report, but we will be following this now very closely to ensure that the lessons are learnt and that people can have confidence going forward in our policing service. That's the most important thing. And as difficult as today is, it's a welcome thing that we have this report, and that all of this is now there to be discussed forensically, and the problems directly challenged and addressed.
Okay, thank you. We'll probably follow that up in future questions as well. So one thing that's happened recently, and we're very pleased to see it, is the launch of the new Vision Zero enforcement dashboard. So we've had a Vision Zero road danger dashboard on incidents, but now we're looking more at the enforcement side of things, and that's really good and long overdue. So can I ask what insights you expect to be able to see to influence boroughs and local policing from having this enforcement dashboard?
So thank you, Chair. As you rightly say, we launched the dashboard on the 9th of March. I think it's a very welcome piece of work, and recognise it was a recommendation of the committee, so thank you for that. And it's taken a lot of work actually to get it into a format that is easy to understand and available for the public so that they can understand what is going on. It gives much easier access and enables people to interpret the enforcement data that we have, and of course replaces previous annual reports and various other documents that mean that we have more real-time, up-to-date information. It clearly will be used to enable us to work with both our own teams, but also boroughs and the police force to see where we need to put any particular focus or emphasis in specific areas. It's too early at the minute. Obviously, it's only just gone live, so we'll need to take some time over the coming weeks and months to really see how the dashboard is helping us, and then to see if there's particular direction that we need to focus on, and clearly welcome any views that you have on that now that the information is available.
Thank you. Yeah, and you can totally expect to see any required improvements fed back to you on that. We're very, very, very keen to be using it in lots of different ways. So going more broadly now to the Vision Zero targets, can you confirm whether TfL met the target set out in the Mayor's Transport Strategy to reduce the number of people who were killed or seriously injured by 65% compared with 2005-9 levels by 2022?
So we've made good progress, but there's still more to be done. In 2021, the number of people killed on London's roads fell substantially to the lowest level on record. We met our target to reduce those who were tragically killed or seriously injured involving a bus, where there was a 70% decrease against the 2005 to 2009 baseline. And we did that for 2 years running in 2020 and 2021, which is earlier than the interim data of 2022. The full year data for 2022 isn't yet available. Road traffic collision data remains provisional until the year is finalised and closed, and the records could still be amended based on revised information from the authorities. And we expect that information to be published in the early summer of this year.
Do you know what the interim data uncorrected says at the moment?
I don't have that to hand, I'm afraid, Chair, but happy to come back to the committee in writing
and
afterwards.
Add all the caveats you want, but it would be great to see where you're at the moment. And then can you... you did already confirm that you have met the 70% target for buses, and you say that's for 2 years in a row already.
That's
so
correct.
you're confident that's sustainable then?
I believe so, and particularly when you take into account the fact that we're rolling out more new buses with the latest safety features, we are confident that we can maintain and continue to keep that level of performance and hopefully improve it further.
Okay, we'll have some more questions about buses shortly. And now I'm going to hand over to Deputy Chair, Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much indeed. You talked about the new dashboard replacing annual reports. So does that mean we won't expect to see another Vision Zero progress report with updates?
So at the moment, the last report we published was November 2021. The progress, the latest evidence, and that confirms our actions up to 23-24. We've got no current plans to issue a further progress report, but we'll keep that under review going forward. And obviously, we report progress to the TfL board through the Safety, Sustainability and HR panel as well. And happy to give updates to this committee as and when appropriate. But no plans to publish a further report at this point in time.
Oh, right, so there's no plans. We would kind of have expected annual reports from you on this particular area, but you're saying apart from your reports to your board subcommittee, there's no plans to publish
at the moment,
further.
we haven't got any plans to, no.
Okay, well, we'll take that away and think about that. I mean, I'd have thought that's something we would expect, and we might want a regular update to this committee in any case. So
happy to review that. I mean, obviously, the fact there's a live dashboard now will give greater real-time information and progress than perhaps an annual report used to do. So I think that's the rationale behind it.
Okay, well let's reflect on that and come back. In the letter that this committee received in October 2022, the Mayor stated that TfL is engaging with government to support this full adoption of EU General Safety Regulation, making safety technologies mandatory in all new vehicles in the UK. Have you got any update on that?
So no specific update, Deputy Chair. I mean, we are keen. In fact, I was with the Minister yesterday at a visit to Bexley Heath bus garage, where we were showing him both the green technology and also the safety enhancements on our latest buses. And one of the requests I asked of him was, could the DFT look at how we can look at the TfL standards, which are widely being adopted across the country now by bus manufacturers, to see if there are some of those standards should be made policy by the DFT and or the ORR, whichever is the appropriate authority, and he agreed to take that away for review. So I was positively encouraged by that, but as far as I'm aware, we've not had any specific commitment from the government. We'll continue to lobby with regard to the European standards and of course the TfL standards.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously we do continue to make that case to government. I believe they are actively considering it. Obviously timetables uncertain at this point, but we would like it obviously in new vehicles in the UK from 2024. That would be our ask. So we wait to see whether or not government looks favourably on that, but we do continue to press them on it.
And just whilst I've got the floor, in terms of Vision Zero, one of the big issues is around motorcycles. I'd pressed the Mayor before about bringing in a motorcycle charter for delivery drivers, and he had welcomed this and said, watch this space. That was back in the autumn. Still not heard any more on that. It seems to me that's a growing area. As always, there are growing threats, whether it's micromobility or whatever, in terms of road danger. Just wondering what progress is being made on that.
I'm not aware of any specific progress, Deputy Chair. I'm happy to take that away. I know we have met with the last mile delivery companies to see how we can improve their awareness for their employees. But I'm happy to take that away and talk to my team around how we can make further progress there.
It's something I discussed with your safety officer at one of your Vision Zero days over at Stratford, and I suggested this is an area to tackle. So be good to get some progress on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. Gosh, we sped through those questions quicker than I was expecting. Good morning to you both. So I just wanted to speak about the Destination Zero training that the Mayor had obviously has stated that he's hoping will be completed by all existing bus drivers by March 2023. Can you confirm whether we're on track to meet this deadline at the end of this month?
Unfortunately, we're not on track to do that. About 11,000 of our bus drivers have completed the training, which is just under half of the total bus driver community, about 24,500 bus drivers in London. The pandemic had a significant impact in terms of our ability to deliver the training as originally intended, and we're working, all the bus operators are now working to see how we can accelerate that in light of the fact restrictions have now clearly been lifted. Yeah, I believe some members of the committee attended and saw some of the training for themselves as well, so any feedback you have on that would be welcome, but this is still a priority for us. Obviously the pandemic got in the way of achieving the target.
I'm sure committee members will pass on that feedback if they have it. So obviously there was originally a different deadline to complete all bus drivers having this training, and the reason that target wasn't met was due to the pandemic. So that was the reason for the initial delay. Obviously the second deadline of the end of March 2023 is after your assessment of having had a delay because of the pandemic. So what is the reason for the further delay?
I wasn't aware of the second target. I only had the information around the March 23, so I'll have to take that away, I'm afraid.
Great, yeah, it'd just be good to know what reasons there were for the second delay and what's being done to overcome it. Okay, on my second question, I wanted to ask about bus driver fatigue. So in a letter to the committee in October 2022, the Mayor stated that fatigue detection technology would be rolled out across 500 buses by the end of 2022, subject to funding availability. So can you just let us know a little bit more about how has that funding been secured, but also whether this deadline has been met?
So we had to, because of the financial situation we were in, the lack of funding, we had to take a decision to postpone the rollout of the fatigue management system on the scale that we'd originally intended. So we currently only have it installed on 40 buses across 5 of the operating companies, and that's clearly not what any of us would have liked. However, we do now have, on the back of the funding agreement that we achieved in August, we now have the funding, and we'll be now rolling out that detection system across the remaining buses so that we can get some real data and analysis of the benefits of it, and that will enable us to achieve that by the end of 2024.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, just to confirm, you have the full funding for that now?
For the 500 buses, yeah. Fantastic.
And just wanting to ask a little bit about this fatigue detection technology. Has there been any conversations with unions, particularly Unite, who's done a lot of campaigning on bus driver fatigue? I think they commissioned a report a few years ago and were probably one of the leading voices on identifying bus driver fatigue as a very serious problem. So I'm just wondering what conversations have been had with them about whether they're satisfied if the fatigue detection technology goes far enough to safeguard bus drivers against bus driver fatigue.
So I'm not aware of any direct conversations between TfL and the unions, because obviously the conversations between the bus operators as the employing entities with the trade unions. My understanding is that there's good cooperation and good understanding with Unite and the bus operators that are trialling it, because also we wanted the trade unions to be supportive of that. But I'm happy to come back after the committee with any specifics. Unfortunately, I'm not close enough to that.
That would be helpful, Seb. I don't know if you have any specifics on that.
No, thank you. I do have regular meetings with the unions on a whole range of issues. This is one. I think I have one this week. So, but there's been no specific objection raised on this with meetings with me. But obviously, this will be part of the agenda of items that we discuss going forward.
Okay, good to hear no specific objections have been raised, and if both of you or either of you could follow up with specifically whether they are supportive of the technology and whether they think it goes far enough to do the protection that's required.
My understanding is they are supportive, otherwise the trial wouldn't be going ahead, but we'll absolutely follow up on that.
Yeah, confirmation would be grand. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Prince, you have some follow-ups.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner. Good morning, Seb. For you, Commissioner, really, a few years ago, myself and some of the committees visited a bus garage in the south, I think down by Southwark, and we saw the example of Mobileye, and TfL actually ran a test on that, and the quite positive responses, but it seems that nothing much more has happened since. Can you enlighten us on that?
Well, as I said before, it's been subject to funding and the challenges we had due to the pandemic. I'm very keen that we do more in this area. We've now committed and got the funding secured for up to 500 buses. I think there are at least 2, if not 3, different types of fatigue management system that we're trialling, all of which relate to observations of the driver's eyesight, but all of which react in a slightly different way. So that's the trial that's ongoing. Once we'll complete the trial and we've got it rolled out on the 500 buses, we'll then be able to make a decision as to how we move forward across the fleet. I think we are a leading operator in this area. I'm not aware of this going on anywhere else in the country of any scale. So, and I would encourage other bus operators to look at it. But I'm keen that we roll this out as soon as we can.
Yeah. Sorry, Commissioner. Mobileye is a system that actually acts as an extra pair of eyes for the driver.
Oh, sorry.
So it's not about no, that's fine. It's not about fatigue. It's about blind spot elimination. It uses camera technology to spot people if they walk in front of the bus. So it's collision avoidance equipment, basically. Which there was a trial. You weren't the commissioner, so I didn't expect you to know all about it, and Seb, you weren't even in existence then. So, but it was, we went. I know the deputy chair and I definitely, and there were a few others went, and we. Or was it just the 2 of us? There you go. We're on the trial, and we were quite impressed with it, weren't we? And there was a trial run. I think it was on the 159 bus off the top of my head. Battersea, that's it, yeah. And there was a bus trial and very positive results, but it's just...
No, sorry, my mistake. Actually, at Bexley Heath, we saw this yesterday. We have it installed on the new buses that... they're called the tram buses because they look a bit like a tram, but they're the latest version, most enhanced single-deck bus with all the latest safety features that has the Mobileye technology installed. It, I think, will be the first route that will have it in regular service. And we'll obviously monitor that going forward. I'll need to confirm to the committee whether or not that is now going to be fitted as standard on all new buses going forward. But as I say, it's been installed on that bus. I saw it for myself yesterday, so my apologies for my confusion on that.
Also, one of my little favourites, toilets for bus drivers. Do we have a date by which time toilets will be available to bus drivers at both ends of the routes?
I'll have to check for you. I don't think there is a plan to have toilets at both ends of all routes, Assembly Prince, because obviously some routes are not long enough necessarily to require it. We've committed to make sure that there is at least one toilet on each route. I think is to my understanding, but I'll need to come back to you when I find it in my briefing as to where we are on the dates on that. So,
Seb, you look very eager to, you look desperate to come in.
No, just on, so you'll know there's an agreed standard with the bus drivers union on the length of route. I think it's 150 minutes for toilets at both ends, and that is in place. There is a toilet available for drivers on every route, but as I say, it's only those over 150 minutes where there is one at both ends. What we saw during the pandemic was that many of the facilities that drivers relied on were third party, and some of the facilities closed as a result of the pandemic, and it was difficult reopening those. So one of the things we're very keen to do is build in a resilience to the system and network that we have, not just to rely on other facilities that may be closed. That's obviously something we don't want to see going forward. So as I said, the standard is for toilets at both ends for routes of 150 minutes or more.
So will you confirm to me then that is in place, where it isn't in place, and where you intend to put it in place, and what the timelines are, please? I've been struggling for quite some years to get that information.
That is in place. So 176 routes with one toilet only at one end. So every route has a toilet. And we've agreed with Unite that on routes with a round trip of less than 150 minutes, having a toilet available at only one end is sufficient. So, yeah, I believe that all routes are covered.
Okay, I'll come back to you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we might incorporate that into some questions in a follow-up letter, if that's all right with you. Yeah, great. And Assemblyman McCartney, you've got a follow-up too.
Yeah, just quickly, if I can, on the issue of toilets. I know when I first started doing some work on this a few years ago, there was always meant to be the agreement that if a bus route was passing a tube station, that a driver could use the London Underground facilities. But I certainly had issues at my local one where London Underground staff were very reluctant to do that. Can I just ask, is that now a matter of course, and how do you deal with issues when they arise?
So it absolutely should be a matter of course, and I've made it abundantly clear ever since I arrived as Managing Director of the Tube 3.5 years ago that it was completely unacceptable that on the rare occasion that LU staff refused to allow any partners, be they bus drivers or police or anybody else, to not use their facilities. That was totally unacceptable. So that instruction has gone out. It's gone out multiple times. In the event that we do, and I think it is a rare event, but in the event we do become aware where staff have refused access, that is absolutely followed up by the local management.
Thank you very much. So we're moving on now to our next section of questions. We're rattling through these today and we'll continue to do so. Assemblymember Baker on funding.
Thanks, Chair. Let's start off with a big one. So the final funding deal, final emergency funding deal agreed with the government and certain ones previously had substantial savings required from Transport for London. Can you provide an update on how TfL is doing with those commitments to making those cuts in line with the funding agreements with government?
Yes, of course. So you'll recall at the start of the pandemic and as a part of our initial financial sustainability plan, which formed the first part of our funding agreement with government, we committed to achieving £730 million worth of recurring savings. We've made good progress on that. We've achieved at the end of the last financial year just under £400 million worth of recurring savings, so 300 million still to go. With the long-term funding agreement that was agreed in August of last year, there was an additional 300 million of recurring savings. That now means we have a target of an additional 600 million to deliver by the financial year 25-26. I'm confident we're on track to do that. We will do that through a number of means. We will do that through working with our supply chain partners in terms of how we mitigate the impact of inflation, how when we award either contract extensions or new contracts, that we're making sure we're getting the maximum value out of those contracts. Clearly, our energy procurement is a significant opportunity, and I think we've made some real progress there around how we hedge the prices of energy, particularly for electricity on the tube. And of course, continuing to work with our trade unions and our staff around making sure that we are as efficient as possible. And that is part of the consultation and negotiation that we're ongoing with our trade unions across TfL. And then the last element is around an organisation becoming more agile, less unnecessarily bureaucratic, and making sure we're quicker and more efficient in terms of how we run the organisation. So by the time we get to 25-26, we'll have delivered £1.1 billion worth of savings, recurring savings, since 2019, and I think off the top of my head 1.7 billion since 2016.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up with a couple of specifics, recent specifics of recurring savings. But are all the savings set out in one place? Apologies if this maybe all the savings under all the deals set out in one place. Is that something that could be done?
You mean in terms of how we've achieved them?
Yeah.
I'm not sure we have one specific document, but we could certainly write to the committee and explain how we've achieved it so far. It's worth saying that, bearing in mind that the remaining 300 million has got to be delivered over the next 2 to 3 year period. We haven't necessarily identified all the plans or all the areas where those savings would actually materialise. So it'll be more of a rear-view mirror look at how we've delivered what we've delivered so far. Clearly, we're very close to the end of the current financial year, so I'd expect that number will increase in terms of the outcome. So perhaps I suggest we write to you after the end of this financial year, which is obviously at the end of March, and we can I can ask Rachel McLean to detail how we've managed that, if that would be acceptable.
Thanks. I think so. Yeah.
That would be great. I'd be particularly keen to know how you managed to save money on energy in the current climate. So
we have some very smart people who do some very good hedging on prices. So
maybe you can tell the rest of the country.
There's a load of people on little bikes generating it in the basement somewhere. Don't take my advice on that. So yeah, I want to ask a couple of specifics that I have actually asked the Mayor about it in MQT back in January during the budget discussions, one of which was because you make reference to supply chain partners. Obviously, there may be reasonable renegotiations or something like that, but I'm concerned about those contracts that mostly involve provision of people and what impact there might be there. So specifically, there was savings to do with maintenance contracts, and I was asking about how we ensure that doesn't have any direct impact on the safety and reliability of the tube. And also the Mayor said that he made some reference to being able to, I've forgotten what phrase he made, I can't remember it, sorry, that was to do with cutting some of the long-term renewals, and I said that obviously that could increase more short-term costs in terms of maintenance. In fact, normally that does. So can you talk us through what those savings actually are, whether what those savings might actually be?
So I guess there's 3 or 4 elements to that, and the largest area of operational expenditure is obviously around maintenance of the tube network, both the infrastructure and our fleets of trains. And the first thing I need to be absolutely clear on is, the safety and security of our services remains a first priority. So we absolutely will not do anything that is going to jeopardise that. If I start first with the renewals, particularly on infrastructure, so things like track and some of our heavy civil assets, so be they embankments or some of our station assets, there's been a number of years now where the ideal amount of money we would like to have spent on renewals has been less than we would have liked. Some of that started pre-pandemic. The pandemic has then exacerbated that through a combination of the restrictions that were put in place, so it was physically not able to do as much as we would like, but obviously the funding situation where we had to make some harsh decisions around where we could afford to do renewals that were not safety critical but would have had an impact on reliability, for example. I think we've done an incredible amount of work. Over the last 3 years, we've developed a really robust asset strategy for all of TfL's assets, so not just on the tube, which has determined what is the investment we need actually for the long term, and how that is prioritised both from a safety perspective, a reliability perspective, a customer perspective, and then largely from a final nice to do perspective, which is obviously the lowest category. That work was largely used to help inform our discussions with government around capital funding for the longer term. So we now have a clear asset strategy across all of the infrastructure. In the tube specifically, we have made some real good progress around actually being more efficient in how we deliver capital renewals as well. And in fact, in this current year, we will over-deliver compared to the plan that we had intended, which is through the good work of my own team, but also working with our supply chain partners. So we have third-party organisations who help us do track renewals, for example, in the above-ground areas. The deep tube is all LU staff, primarily. On the fleets, we have made decisions to delay some of the heavy maintenance of the trains. So that's not a safety issue, it's a reliability cost issue. But we're now undertaking those fleets. So currently the S stock, as we call it, which is the Metropolitan line fleet, the S8 stock, and the Jubilee line fleet are both going through their heavy maintenance procedures. So that has enabled us to reduce the amount of expenditure during the pandemic, but we are now delivering those heavy maintenance programs slightly later than planned. That is all done through detailed assessment by our engineering teams and our experts to make sure that the trains are safe to run and that there's no safety risk. Any safety critical work would still go ahead regardless of that. And it's worth saying that of all our tube fleets, they're all maintained in-house with the exception of Northern Line fleet. That is provided by a third party on a long-term contractual agreement. And what we're doing now is focusing on how do we make sure we really renew the infrastructure that we need to going forward to maintain safety first and then reliability second. And I think we've done a really good job maintaining a reliable service on the tube network. But going forward, this is why it's so important that we do receive a long-term capital investment for the future. We need that for the new fleets, Piccadilly line, as you know. First trains are in production, but we need the capital for next year to continue with that programme. And obviously we want to get the funding for replacement fleets on the Bakerloo line and the Central line. If you take the Bakerloo line as an example, those trains are also going through a maintenance period at the minute. They're having accessibility modifications done to them as well. Those trains were put into service in 1972 and our team's doing an incredible job maintaining them safely and reliably. So I'm confident that our maintenance regime is really robust. It's absolutely safe. Nobody should have any concerns around that. But we have to make a balanced judgment each time around how much we can afford, and at the same time, how can we challenge ourselves to be more efficient so that every pound we spend, we get closer to a maximum pound of value back.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I hope we haven't lost the young people in the audience, but I can assure you that's all really, really important. I'm sure we'll keep on top of that. Also, like to say, Seb, I think Heidi used to always mention that the Bakerloo lines were as old as her. I don't know if you can dig out a similar anecdote. But
I couldn't possibly comment, but that's definitely one thing that did come about before my existence.
I've got another related question. This is actually about bus contracts, and we're going to go in detail onto buses later, so I don't want to cut across any of that. So it is specifically about the 13 million that in the Mayor's budget has been identified as being saved following renegotiation of the bus operator contracts. My concern is literally where can bus operators save that amount of money, and also in terms of the equality impact, which obviously discussed with you a few times, given that the people who use the bus are often the most disadvantaged. Was there any assessment of potentially equality impact made before a savings on those bus contracts were identified?
So on buses specifically, I mean, we have a rolling programme every fortnight of bus. You know, the volume of bus contracts we have is enormous in London. It's the biggest bus operation in the UK, as you know. And fortnightly we are having new contracts that are being assessed and decisions made. Those savings obviously depend on the operator. They depend on whether or not there's any frequency changes, for example. It depends around the nature of the bus that is being provisioned. So, for example, there are significant savings from changing from a diesel bus to an all-electric bus. So the savings come in many ways. I don't have the specifics around the 13 million in front of me, but I can assure you that we always assess each contract and each bid fully. We always make sure that the contract is awarded in a way that ensures we deliver the service that's required. I wouldn't expect any of the savings to impact on equality assessment in any way, shape or form. That's more related to if we're changing the services or routings or that sort of thing. But in terms of the actual contract that's being awarded, I wouldn't expect there to be any change there.
Okay, but if they do sometimes affect frequency or potentially routes, then that would be.
Yeah, exactly. But
and I know those aren't consulted fully, but of course frequency of buses.
Clearly, if there's any frequency or service change, we'd always do an assessment. But in terms of the savings, I think very, very few of those savings are linked to service changes. It's more around the cost side of it.
What they are. Are we able to ask for any details you have about that 13 million?
I can write to the committee afterwards, yeah.
Okay. I've got a few more questions on funding now. I'm going to rattle through these. Yeah.
Assembly Member Rogers wanted to come in.
I'll come in now.
That question, I think.
Apologies.
Yeah, I'll come in now.
Yeah, no worries.
Cheers.
Quick one. Thank you. Commissioner, could you just let us know where we are on pension reform, please? My understanding is that the latest deadline has slipped twice. Where are we at the moment?
So the government have extended the deadline twice. It hasn't slipped as a result of TfL not providing any information. The original deadline was 31st of January. That was extended by the DfT to the 28th of February because they had not been able to finalise their response to our October submission. They wrote to us and then gave us till the 17th of March to respond in line with the funding agreement. I wrote to the Department of Transport on Friday, which was the 17th of March, making it clear that we are committed to the conditions of the funding agreement, but with regards to pensions reform, there is insufficient information in the government's response to our October submission for us to be able to make any informed decision in how we move forward, and therefore we have written back to the department with a number of questions. We've also asked for further engagement cross-government with the Department for Levelling Up and Treasury so that we understand what they believe the options are. And I've also indicated that I don't think it's achievable to hit the May target of the funding agreement for us to start consultation if there are any proposals. At the moment there are not any proposals and we're waiting for government to respond to our letter on the 17th.
Okay. So I think you submitted 3 options in the end, didn't you? Well, two
wide
changes
proposals and no change.
And a no change, yeah. So you're not at the stage where there's a preferred option. You haven't got to that stage with
Absolutely no. From a TfL perspective, we don't have sufficient information to be able to get to that position. The government have indicated that they believe LGPS, the local government pension scheme, might be their preferred alternative, but there's a lot of information that's still required, I think, for any decision to be made along those lines.
And is there any sort of any timescale by which these discussions become so protracted that there becomes any kind of risk with the overall funding settlement?
Well, I would like to think not. I think we have engaged fully with the department on this. We've been consistent in our position all the way along. It's worth being really clear that even if there was a final proposal, it would need legislation change as well. And we would need greater certainty on that. So I can't give a time frame going forward. I would love to have a time frame of either being able to tell our colleagues who frankly are the ones who are most unnerved and concerned about this, to say there is definitely going to be no change, or if there is a change, it's not going to be before some point in the future. But we're not able to do this. I have a planned meeting with the department in the next week or so, where I hope we'll be able to agree how we try and move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, thank you. So technically we've got 4 minutes of our time allocated to this section left. So please do what you can, and guests, if you can keep your answers as short as possible, that would be marvellous.
Thank you, I will do. What assessment has TfL done on the impact of the stability of TfL's reserves or future spend and delivery resulting from the additional 500 million facility established by the Mayor?
So under the terms of the funding agreement, we've got agreement from government that we will keep our own reserves at the level of 1.2 billion. I would anticipate that going forward, once we're out of long-term funding, we would aim to raise this to about 1.4, which I think Rachel McLean was clear about when we attended the Budget and Performance Committee in January. It is absolutely our strong desire as TfL not to call on the 500 million and GLA facility. That is there to enable our CFO to ensure there is a balanced budget in the event that there are some headwinds or other issues that mean that we can't do it without it. But that facility is very much a loan facility. It would need to be repaid. It would need to be repaid with the appropriate terms. And so it's absolutely our intent and our priority as an executive team not to call on that unless it's absolutely the last resort. I don't know if Seb, if you...
And it seems, just to say, congratulations on Crossrail now apparently being 1 in 6 of every rail journeys in London. I'm slightly nervous about all the what's going on with all the other rail journeys, but we'll just concentrate on the business. But it would be inappropriate for us to do a Q&A considering all the previous ones without asking for an update on Crossrail funding, where it's landed.
Yeah, just bear with me. I'm trying to find my notes.
It'll be one of those. It will be one of those post-it notes, I think. But
yeah, one of many. Yeah, thank you, sir. So you'll recall that the outgoing Crossrail board forecast that to complete Crossrail they would need up to 1.1 billion pounds of funding. We secured 825 million. After that, we are on track, I'm pleased to say, to deliver well below the 1.1 billion. We secured, as part of the further funding in the summer, a further 98.5 million funding. Our target at the end of period 9 is that we anticipate the final cost at P50 to be £15,931,000,000, pounds, leaving a gap of about £44 million from the available funds. However, through the fantastic work of the Crossrail team, my own team in the Elizabeth line, and under Rachel McLean's leadership, we're now currently forecasting the gap to about £15 million, 1.5, and we'll continue to work towards trying to get that down to zero, which I think would be a remarkable achievement. But at the minute, we're expecting to be about £15 million over the available funding.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And finally, can you give us an update on fares projections post 23-24, and also the impact of the funding deal requiring, this may be one for Seb, requiring TfL to fund any difference between the national fare rises and any difference that the mayors may want to put forward?
Shall I go first? Yeah. Obviously our overall ridership remains below pre-pandemic levels. I think we are, certainly compared to other public transport authorities in the UK, we're doing much better. And we're continuing to look at ways of how we can encourage ridership overall, particularly on Mondays and Fridays. We forecast as part of our business plan a steady growth to 86% of pre-pandemic levels, excluding the Elizabeth line, on tube and rail modes, and 91% by December 2025. Now, we are going to try and see what we can do to accelerate that and improve it. In our business plan, we assume a 4% rise in the year 24-25 to fares. Obviously, the 5.9% has been enacted this month. And then beyond that, we are currently assuming an RPI plus 1% fares increase in subsequent years. Obviously, all fares decisions are ultimately for the Mayor, but that is our current working assumption going forward.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, obviously, fare increases are not something that anyone would make a decision on with any relish. There's always a balance to be struck between the amount of funding that is required for a network under the funding model that we have, and obviously the impact that any increase will have on the travelling public. It is a condition of the deal that if we did not match the government's 5.9% overall increase, then we would have received a corresponding reduction in the amount of funding we had. And as we know, the deal was extremely hard fought for and negotiated for, and quite simply, the needs of the network mean that it was the most prudent decision in this case. I should say, of course, that had it not been for the fares freeze, fares would be correspondingly higher as a result. And so the Mayor is obviously keen to do everything he can to keep fares low. And it's the impact of the pandemic that has unfortunately resulted in the increases we've seen. I should say that the bus fare is still the lowest in the country, and committed to keep it that way.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much. And thank goodness our bus fare isn't increasing to the average across the country. Right, we now have some questions on active travel investment, and Assemblymember Prince is going to lead.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you, Commissioner, what impact has the long-term funding deal with the government had on TfL's Healthy Streets programme?
So obviously during the pandemic we obviously had to suspend and had no funding for a lot of that. As a result of the funding agreement we reached in August, we have now been able to resume that spending, and in the business plan we assume spending of £150 million per annum on our Healthy Streets programme, working with boroughs across the city as well. And that's key for us obviously to further enhance walking, cycling and use of the bus to get towards our 80% target. We are working closely with the boroughs. I am spending a lot of time getting out and about and engaging with the boroughs, which as an organisation we've not been able to do as much as we would have liked previously. We've got £69 million a year for boroughs to enable them to make improvements to their own streets. And although the 150 million is lower than the original 2019 business plan, it's still a significant amount in the context of where we are in overall TfL funding. We're also spending a lot of time analysing how we can deliver these schemes more efficiently, using different materials to which return a better value on investment. And some of those schemes have already gone into design in Nine Elms and Tolworth, for example. So, yeah, we had that unfortunate break, as we know. I think we're now on a positive journey towards starting to make a difference again.
Thank you. Can you also provide an update, please, on the current work TfL is doing with low traffic neighbourhoods, LTNs as we affectionately know them, and how many more LTNs are TfL expecting to be introduced across London?
So since the pandemic, over 100 low traffic neighbourhoods have been installed. Most of these in line with government guidance. Temporary schemes that have since been made, with a number of temporary schemes now made permanent. Further guidance was issued in 2021, which encouraged boroughs to carry a thorough engagement with their communities and ensure schemes were well understood and publicised. We're also asking the boroughs that they discuss the impacts on those LTNs on the surrounding road and highway network and, of course, on bus services prior to any implementation. We'll be issuing some further guidance to the boroughs later this year, which will set out the best practice based on the learnings that we've got from the last 2 to 3 years. And we will publish that document summarising the benefits of LTNs in the coming months. I don't have, I don't think I have the number of any future LTNs due to be installed, but I'm happy to take that away as an action.
I know that we had some removed in Redbridge because they were just complete car crash. Do you have any that you are considering removal, and you've said you're going to list the benefits? Will you be listing the disbenefits of the LTNs at all?
I don't think there's any LTNs that TfL is responsible for. Obviously, if they're all in the boroughs, that's for the borough to make a decision. We will happily advise and give them, all the boroughs, any advice if they request it, or equally, if we have any concerns around the impact of LTNs on the TfL road network, which I don't believe is the case. But we would clearly want to work with the boroughs on this issue.
Can I help you then, Commissioner, in relation to the A205, which I think you will agree, being the South Circular, is a TfL road. The LTNs that were introduced in Lewisham inside the 205, so we're looking at places like Hither Green and areas around there. A recent question to the local council, Lewisham Council, they admitted that there's been a rise in asthma rates across the borough post-introduction of the LTNs. So clearly there's a health issue with the LTNs. And indeed, Rosmond Adu Kissy Deborah, who the Mayor frequently quotes when he's talking about this issue, has long been arguing that LTNs have displaced traffic onto the peripheral main roads. As you know, she lives just off the A205. I think it's just south of the A205. I was speaking to her the other day, and that this is ruining the health of the people who live along or close to the 205. So, as you've offered, would you look into that for us, please?
I'll happily take that away. Some member Prince, I'm not aware of the specific one you talked to, but I'll certainly take that away and see what how we work with the borough to see if there are any issues there.
Yeah, I believe my colleague Caroline Pidgeon might be able to offer you some more information, because I got that out of a Liberal Democrat leaflet.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure I can add much more to it, but there you go.
Assemblymember Prince, can I know there's been a bit of back and forth on written replies. Can I just get a bit of clarity and make a specific request for information? Because I think you've said, Commissioner, that you're going to publish information on the benefits. Presumably that is an evidence review that will look at disbenefits as well later in the year, so we can wait for that. But we've asked for. Presumably you are tracking the low traffic neighbourhoods that the boroughs are introducing, and any that are removed, the ones that are being made permanent. Would it be possible to get that in terms of installations and removals and made permanents given to us as a written response? Because that would be a useful reference for us to have.
Happy to take that action away. Obviously, just to stress, they are the borough's responsibilities, but I'm happy.
We recognise that, but you must be in dialogue with them and be able to do a London-wide picture for us.
Happy to see if we can provide that information. And in terms of the specific LTN that Assemblymember Prince talks to, I'm happy to take that as an action to see if there are any specific issues that need to be addressed.
Marvellous. I think that clarifies things. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chair. It's very helpful. So moving on. Does TfL expect to progress the Livable Neighbourhoods programme? If so, please can you provide some further detail on the work being carried out by this? One second, I think our young friends are leaving, so we will let them. Bye-bye. See you. Thanks for coming.
Okay, we just for clarity, we're saying goodbye to the young people who've been watching. Thank you very much.
Very well behaved, by the way.
Not the young Commissioner and Deputy Mayor for Transport.
Yeah. Future ones, maybe.
So do please press on with the questions.
For the Commissioner to reply, but I thought you might want to wait until the movement behind him has finished. It's a bit distracting, I'd imagine.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, with the onset of the pandemic, there was a loss of budget for the scheme, and it was paused until early October 2022. As a result of the funding deal, we now do have some funds that become available. We're currently funding 5 borough schemes, which amounts to about £4 million over the next 2 financial years with regards to livable neighbourhoods.
Thank you. And last week, TfL launched a consultation on plan for safety improvements around King's Cross. What is the current progress on Dangerous Junction and how the next stages of investment will be prioritised, including the junctions which need investment, please?
Sorry, Senator, I missed the last part.
What are the next stages of prioritising and identifying those junctions that need investment?
Yes, so we've completed 43 of the 73 junctions that were highlighted as potentially dangerous. We're now starting the 44th, which is York Road in Wandsworth, which will see improvements to the circulation around the area and crossing points. We continue to work on design work for a number of other locations. We completed the detailed design work on Holloway Road in Islington, which will improve or provide 10 new and improved crossing points along that road. In July 22, we invited the public to share their views on Battersea Bridge Junction with Chain Walk. And following that engagement, which concluded in January of this year, we're hoping to publish the consultation report next month in April, which will set out the next steps for the improvements to that junction. And that will be the second phase of the Battersea Bridge scheme. As you say, King's Cross, we've just published the consultation on that. Will, we believe, deliver significant improvements in that area for both cycling and pedestrians. And in terms of other schemes, we've got designs in work for a further 7 schemes specifically, and we're developing high-level options for 4 others.
Thank you. As we're on junctions, Deputy Mayor, I know you've done some work on motorcycles around this issue. Do you want to mention anything on that at all?
Just obviously, motorcycles are part and parcel of the overall safety considerations that we have for different vehicle types. So we have to look at the way in which they use the road space and existing mitigation measures, and whether or not they're suitable. So they're given special consideration. They're very much part of the design process for these junctions that TfL are looking at.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I've got some follow-ups on this section, if that's okay. So there's the LTNs programme. There's also a School Streets programme, which is similarly being rolled out quite rapidly, but also there have been a few removals. Could we also get the same report back on those if you're also tracking those?
I'll take that as an action to see if we can do that.
That would be really good. And when you come back, will you say where each of them are, which schools? That would be really useful too.
Yeah.
We know there's a list of schools with air pollution problems, and we can compare that as well. So going on the safer junctions question particularly, we're not seeing the big transformative changes that we'd like at these junctions. I mean, at King's Cross, you'll agree this is a temporary solution. I recently went on a tour around Holborn where there are some improvements, but it's not the full-scale gyratory removal that we'd have liked. What is the main reason for this? Is it funding that's holding back this programme of properly changing the TfL, the big TfL junctions that you run?
Well, obviously Holborn isn't a TfL junction, it's Camden's, but we're working closely with Camden. We've got some more design work. We already made a number of changes there jointly with the borough. Fundamentally, the issue is funding. There are still in the order of just under 30 junctions that we believe improvements need to be made at. Already highlighted the number that we're working on detailed designs for. If we could get additional funding, then we would obviously look to accelerate and implement some of those quicker. But equally, we've also got to work with boroughs in those areas where it's their junctions as well. So it's an absolute priority for us, but we have to recognise there is a limit to how much money we have to do some of these quite detailed and expensive works. The next big one obviously is Old Street, which will the main surface works are all complete. The road layout is now complete. The cycle lanes are being finished. That will be complete in the early summer. That obviously was a location that was a significant concern due to a number of incidents that happened there. And we think that's a good example where we can make a fundamental change, and we'd love to do more, but it's fundamentally an issue of funding.
And so what would a gold standard junctions programme, where everything was fully funded and done to the most beautiful extent, how much money would that involve?
I'd have to come back to you because obviously we don't have the detailed design work for all of the junctions, and you won't do it until you've got the money. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We can do the detailed design work, but of course we also there is a resource issue here as well. To fundamentally change the layout of a highway requires quite specific engineering skills and construction skills to make sure the design is right, and that's on a standard highway. If you take somewhere like Old Street, which of course is on top of the Victorian Tube and National Rail station, there's a lot more complexity involved. So what I'm focused on is making sure we get the design right before we start construction, because if you start construction not knowing fully the site surveys, the implications of what's beneath the surface, etc., you end up with a programme that will be more costly and take longer to deliver, and we need to make sure we avoid that wherever possible.
Yeah, no, I do understand that, and you point out there's also resources in expertise. But getting things shovel ready takes time, and if you wait until you've got the money and then you start to plan it, and then you see what I mean, that getting more things ready with the money that you do have might be a good thing to do.
But that's exactly what we're doing with the number of schemes I've said here. We've got 10 schemes which we are doing detailed design work on. We'll get that design work complete. We can't do detailed design work on 30 schemes concurrently. That's just impractical, even if we had the money. So we get these 10 done, then hopefully we'll have the funding to be able to implement and construct the new junctions, and then we can move on to the next tranche.
Seb, you wanted to come in there?
If I may, it's important. Obviously, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. So yes, clearly we have a series of schemes that would. It would be ideal to have them implemented immediately in all of the locations of the dangerous junctions. Clearly, funding is a major barrier to that. But there are a number of things that we can and are doing in the interim. And I think Holborn Gyratory is a good example of the kind of things that, when taken in conjunction with macro policies, such as, for example, generally improving cycling, walking and public transport usage across the capital. And I also think the government's highway code changes will be an important part of that as well in terms of driver behaviour. But, for example, at the Holborn Gyratory, we have a new segregated cycle track north and southbound on Southampton Row. We have a new cycle gate southbound on Southampton Row at the junction with Theobald's Road. New advanced stop lines for cyclists in all directions. Early start of around 4 seconds for cyclists in all directions. Cyclists being able to turn right in 2 stages on all junction arms. Bus, cycle, taxi lane southbound from 150 Southampton Row through to the junction with Theobald's Road is now 24 hours a day. Bus, cycle and taxi lane southbound from Southampton Row junction to Catton Street is also now 24 hours a day. And we removed the pedestrian guardrails at the junction, which were a particular pinch point for cyclists to reduce potential harm to them. So there are a number of different small-scale things that we can do in conjunction with the boroughs without the funding for the overall junction redesign that we would all want to see, and obviously a number of criteria that we would use to ensure that we implement those small-scale changes as quickly as possible in the most dangerous junctions.
Absolutely, and I went to tour the Holborn scheme to look at it in as much detail as you just read out. We're looking at every part of that. I think there is some reliance, over-reliance, I would say, on advanced signals for cyclists. You get a few seconds of just a cycle-only light, and particularly in areas with high pedestrian traffic. I was there at Holborn observing the sheer build-up of pedestrians at each of the crossings. We're not clearing the pedestrians each time they get a light. And as a cyclist, what I've observed with advanced signals is the pedestrians aren't aware of it, so they're still crossing when you're trying to go, and you won't go out and plough through pedestrians who are still using that junction. I'm just not sure how effective that sort of that reliance on that particular measure is. I know the team who showed it me were super confident in this, but it doesn't always work in practice, is my experience.
I think if it was the only measure, absolutely, you wouldn't want to rely on that alone, but it clearly helps. I think overall what we need is a recognition that everybody is a road user and that we share the space and that we need to respect and learn from each other. And I think far too often it's the case that we all get impatient and tired and frustrated with things in our daily life, and unfortunately travelling to and from wherever we're going is no exception. But I think clearly the advance go option for cyclists does provide them with an additional opportunity to get ahead of the traffic. I completely accept what you're saying about pedestrians not necessarily always respecting the additional travel time that cyclists have. It's something that cyclists will always need to take into account, that there will be people who unfortunately don't necessarily follow the pedestrian lights, and that's a part and parcel of being in a big city and learning from.
Well, to be clear, I wasn't criticising pedestrians. I was saying they were still crossing because there were so many of them and they weren't given enough time in the first place.
Sure, yeah. and I think that understanding of the way in which we interact with the road space is a very important part of changing the culture that we have in order to improve safety.
Okay. I just want to go back to King's Cross for a moment as well, with my 1 minute that I've got left in this section. Andy, you might be the right person to answer this, or go back and get an answer. The main reason, apart from funding, that I understood we weren't doing something more dramatic with the King's Cross Gyratory was the need to be handing over part of Euston Road to HS2 for a while. So doing a big change at that junction was not sensible. With the delay in HS2, is there a sense that we might change that approach and maybe bring forwards bigger changes while they, if we can get them to vacate that space for a while?
So I'll talk to the team about that. I think it's unlikely because despite the announcements on HS2, the Euston Road will still, part of it will still be unavailable because tunnelling works are still continuing. There will still be construction isn't a complete pause, and the ability to return the Euston, as I understand it, return the Euston Road to full use. So I'll talk to the team, and we'll obviously, we've got a lot of engagement with HS2 around the impact of the announcements to see what that means for us.
Okay.
But I think it's probably unlikely.
And potentially the bit they were going to do there, they could still proceed with, and we could get it back at the same time. I mean, something like that would be really helpful, because if the wait's going to get even longer to sort out that area, that would be frustrating.
Yeah, frankly, I need to go and visit the site myself to go and. I haven't been there since the construction works have started on the road. But I think the reality is we're going to have a significant part of the Euston Road unavailable for a number of years,
decades potentially,
and we've got to make sure it is our responsibility, and I think we're doing a very effective job at the minute to manage the disruption that's been caused by that. Our priority is making sure that the road is safe for all users. If there is an ability for us to review the scheme or make further enhancements or modifications because of the changes that have been announced, then we will absolutely look at that.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we move on to questions about river crossings and Assembly-Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I'm sure in your first few months as TfL Commissioner, you've looked at our previous committee work on river crossings, and we made several recommendations in 2021. Wanting to just what funding TfL has set aside to maintain your river crossings this year and over the coming years, and specifically whether you want to outline how much money you are putting into Hammersmith Bridge.
Thank you for the question. River crossings is a complex issue, as you know, for us. Our primary focus is around those crossings for which we are 100% accountable and responsible for. The funding provided by the government during the pandemic clearly has been vital for us to enable to carry out critical safety works. Our primary focus has been around Blackwall Tunnel and Rotherhithe Tunnel. But the level of renewal we need is significantly below what we anticipated prior to the pandemic. At the moment, we're able to progress some work, so lighting, concrete repairs, CCTV works for Blackwall Tunnel South Bend. We plan to appoint a contractor for detailed design and build stages for the project shortly. But given the wider pressure on renewals, we'll need to review that position before committing. We've completed some preliminary work for the Rotherhithe Tunnel, which does need a full refurbishment. We have taken the decision that we won't be doing any significant works on Rotherhithe until the Silvertown Tunnel comes into operation. Obviously that creates an opportunity potentially for us when Silvertown goes into use, and at the moment we don't have the funding for the necessary works for Rotherhithe, so that is an open issue, but there's a number of short-term capital interventions that we're making. On Hammersmith, as you know, it's not one of our assets, but the current phase of stabilisation works are now well progressed. I think they're due to complete shortly. The existing pedestals are being strengthened, which will mitigate the risk of further structural degradation and ensuring the bridge can remain open for pedestrians and cyclists for the foreseeable future. So that is clearly good news. The longer-term plans for strengthening the bridge continue to be developed by Hammersmith and Fulham, who submitted an outline business case to TfL and the DFT at the end of February. And progression of the strengthening works will be subject to affordability going forward.
Are we able to see that outline business case about Hammersmith, please? Is that possible?
Let me take the action away and see if that's possible to do so.
Okay.
It's obviously not our business case. It's the Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham's.
But obviously they'll probably be asking for funding or some support from you. I mean, one of the issues is around coordinating all the ongoing maintenance needs of river crossings. Can you update us on action TfL has taken about the creation of a Thames River Crossing Coordination Group following one of our recommendations?
So yeah, obviously this something I wasn't a party to previously. My understanding is that we've given further consideration to it, and at the moment we don't believe that it's the resource required to do it. To formalise it in the way the Assembly suggests would be the best use of public funds at the moment. We do think there are process in place where notification and coordination of works is done in the best way to minimise impacts to travelling public, and we've established channels to communicate with stakeholders and Londoners. I think there is more that we can do across the various river crossing organisations to see where there are gaps, but at the moment there's no intention or no plan, as far as I'm aware, to create a coordination group.
I think that's disappointing to hear, because it really is important for us to be able to understand, and you look at other places around the world, it's a basic thing, even if there are different owners and the complexity, that actually you can see the state of repair where investment is needed and actually have a proper ongoing programme. Can you update us on discussions which former Commissioner Andy Byford committed to for a report on the condition of London's river crossings to be included in the annual State of the City report, which is produced by London Councils and London Technical Advisors Group? So at least there's something in the public domain, you know, that gives a picture of the state of our river crossings. They aren't just bridges, of course. You've got tunnels as well. You've talked about the road ones, but you've got things like the Greenwich foot tunnels as well.
So we have contributed to the work that was done on the latest State of the City report. The report wasn't extended to cover a specific section on river crossings because it's an annual snapshot of asset condition, and therefore couldn't be compared to previous. Had to be compared to previous reports. To provide the meaningful data, we need to show how that condition has changed over time, and as I'm understanding, that's beyond the scope of the State of the City report. I think going forward, we will consider adding this as an appendix to the report going forward. I do agree that I think there is more that can be done here. I have to be honest, I haven't, you know, in the relatively short time I've been in position, this hasn't been a priority for me, so I will happy to take it away and see what more we can be done. A real priority at the minute is the assets that TfL is responsible for, which need some significant investment. We don't have the funding for that, but I agree that there could be better coordination going forward, so I'll take that away without making any firm commitment, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your priorities TfL's assets, but clearly another asset close, such as Hammersmith Bridge, has a huge impact
Absolutely.
on your assets as well. So actually having that coordination is something we thought was a really simple idea, but could really benefit everyone. And when you see in the news, Blackfriars Bridge, there you go, Bridge House Trust with their ancient legacy out there doing some beautiful work restoring that bridge. We need to have that sort of picture across the whole of our crossings in London. Yeah. So it'd be great if you and perhaps the Deputy Mayor might take this away to see how we could bring all of this together.
Yeah. Happy to do that.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Just very quickly, it's a very good point. And I think, you know, the coordination does happen on individual crossings. I mean, Hammersmith is a good example where TfL have been working with the government and with the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, along with other stakeholders such as stakeholders south of the river as well. The issue is often that we don't have regular enough meetings, and when things happen, you know, we can be blindsided by it. So I think that coordination point is a very good one, and even when it happens on the individual crossings, having that overall group, whether it be formal or otherwise, I think is something we want to look at.
I think former Deputy Mayor Heidi Alexander felt this was a really big gap in the whole sort of system. So I hope perhaps a fresh pair of eyes that you'll be able to take this away. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, if you haven't read the report produced by the committee recently, please do go back and read it, because it's very interesting and makes really excellent recommendations that you really should take up. I've got Assemblymember Desai, and then I have Assemblymember Rogers and Assemblymember Prince in that order. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to the panel, and apologies for being a bit late earlier in the morning. Just 3 questions to you, Andy, if I may. So the last State of the City report, which was published last year, said that the current maintenance backlog is something in the region of 1.59 billion pounds. Has the situation improved since the report or got worse?
I'm afraid I haven't read the report, so I'll need to take that away and have a look at it, so I can't really comment. But I would be surprised if it's improved based on the funding situation across the city, the boroughs and TfL.
Okay. Well, you can write to us in due course. We already talked about bridges, Hammersmith, Blackfriars. As I understand it, over 80 bridges in London are currently substandard and subject to restrictions. Are we seeing an increase in the number of interim measures placed on our bridges due to maintenance issues?
Bridges across rivers, from a TfL perspective, we don't have, as far as I'm aware, any significant restrictions. We also have restrictions in our tunnels. In bridges across some of our road network, we are absolutely having to put more restrictions in place. The most recent one obviously being the Brent Cross flyover, where we had to restrict the weight of HGVs, and it is a concern and an issue that I raise with Department for Transport regularly, that we need to find a solution for how we get funding for the renewal programme that we need for major road infrastructure in London. We have nearly 50 structures now where we have some form of restriction on the road network in London because of their condition. They're safe, and otherwise we would close them, but we have some form of operating restriction as a result.
Which brings me to my final question. If I can just talk about the Gallows Corner flyover, which I understand you're seeking to renew it, the flyover, and have submitted a draft outline business case to the Department for Transport, seeking a funding contribution through the Major Road Network Programme. Can I ask you, Andy, why is it the case the government is asking TfL to bid for a funding contribution as opposed to giving London proper funding for road maintenance as it does across the rest of the country?
It's a really great point. I don't know the history behind it, but that is the reality of what we have to do. We've been told in the last, I think it was the October or November budget statement, that funding would be made available for Gallows Corner. As yet, we've not seen the detail on that. We have highlighted to the department that we think London TfL should be given a pot of capital for the London road network, that then TfL can decide how best it can be deployed to ensure that we focus on the assets that are needed, because the number of structures, the number of areas where we need to intervene and take action is on a different scale compared to other parts of the country, and we don't think including London in the major road network funding is the most appropriate and best use of public funds.
Thank you. Seb, if you have any observations to make.
No, and Andy answered fully.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Rogers.
Thank you. I had some questions on Hammersmith Bridge, but Assemblymember Pigeon has covered those. But all I'd like to say is just to reiterate Assemblymember Pigeon's call for sight of that draft outline business case, and maybe, Deputy Mayor, if there are political sensitivities, whether you would be able to liaise with the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council to see if we can get sight of that case, because there's obviously significant public interest in it.
Absolutely. I could commit to that, no problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you. And Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about river crossings, as you know, we're not well blessed in East London with river crossings. I know that the Blackwall Tunnel is closed sometimes at the weekend. But my biggest worry at the moment is the Woolwich Free Ferry, which seems to have completely stopped. Now, we were all very helpful in East London when TfL took over the ferry, because the previous owners of the new ferry clearly weren't doing a very good job, but it seems that now TfL has surpassed them in the non-availability of the boats, because they're just none at all.
So firstly, I'd like to apologise for users of the Woolwich Ferry. The service hasn't been good enough for a significant period of time. There's been a number of issues behind that. There have been technical issues with the vessels themselves. There have been some technical issues with the docking system, and of course we've had quite a prolonged period of industrial action. I'm pleased to say the industrial action has now been resolved. We've also recruited a number of new colleagues for the Woolwich Ferry as well, and we are now back to a regular two-vessel service. There was a planned closure for maintenance a few weeks ago for about 14 days, where we upgraded a number of an amount of the infrastructure, and I'm confident that we'll now see a regular service going forward. It's been a very difficult period for a number of reasons, and I'd say apologies to everybody who's been affected by that, but I'm hopeful and confident that we'll now see a more regular two-vessel service.
Can I just interrupt for a moment? Because I think the main speakers are out. I'm hearing you only through my machine here.
I think they come and go.
They're coming and going.
It's the ones. So I'm just wondering, can the members of the public hear okay?
Oh.
Oh, there's a maybe coming from the audience. If you can speak up as much as you can, so that the sounds that are coming out of our units here can travel as far as possible, that would be great.
Do you want me to re-answer that?
No, I don't think so, but just it'll be captured by the broadcast, but I'm just slightly concerned about the people in the back of the room.
Can I just say, Commissioner, I take on board what you've said, but when it was announced that there would be a pause in the service, because I do use the Woolwich Ferry, there was no notification of when it would be back in service. The service just said, as from so-and-so, I can't remember exactly what it said, there will be no Woolwich Ferry service. There was no, we've got a planned maintenance that's going to be X number of weeks.
Well, let me follow up on that, because as far as I'm aware, we absolutely did put a date on it. In fact, we brought it back into service 3 days earlier than we'd communicated. So let me take that away, and if you've got any specifics, Assembly Member Prince, happy to look at that, because I'm certainly maybe the false impression, but I hope not, that we absolutely did communicate that it would be closed for a period of time and the anticipated return to service.
Well, I'm just going on the signs that I see. You've got lights along the roadways on the A2, I think it is, not very good at South London, and it just said Woolwich Ferry closed from such and such a date, no reopening dates on that.
Okay, I'll follow up on that, because we absolutely did have a published date. So.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And I've got a follow-up question as well about river crossings for walking and cycling. I know quite a lot's been made about the new cycle bridge across the Silvertown and Blackwall Tunnel approach. That's only being put there in order to widen that road. It's not really new infrastructure. I know that the Greenwich Foot Tunnel has a lot of problems with its lifts and accessibility there. What plans are you putting in place to improve walking and cycling across the river?
So I think I'll need to come back to you, Chair, on that, because I don't have the specifics to hand. I'm not aware of any specific schemes. Obviously, Silvertown, we are improving the accessibility around the approach roads, but I don't think there's any intention or any plans at the minute. So.
Yeah, just it's a very good point, because clearly there is a gap in options for crossing the river east of Tower Bridge for walking and cycling, and it is something that the Mayor is very keen to press TfL to look at options on. Clearly there were a number of options that were developed before the pandemic that were looked at. There was a fixed bridge, for example, between Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf. Unfortunately, the costs for that escalated considerably. And I know that my predecessor had proposals for a ferry service that would operate. I am very keen that we look again at the feasibility of that. Clearly the pandemic put a hold on so much of what was possible. Going forward, I want to see what we can do with what we've got, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to work up a number of potential options, clearly subject to funding, that would then plug the gap for walking and cycling in East London.
Thank you very much. I'm getting signals, but I've had a signal from Amish Desai to follow up.
My question was about the Rotherhithe River crossing, which you answered, Deputy Mayor. But can I just say the point of information that I attended, I think, 2 public meetings before the first lockdown, and the overwhelming majority of local residents were in favour of an improved ferry service.
Oh, absolutely. I think it would make an enormous difference to the area. Obviously, there is a ferry at the moment, I think it's RB4, which provides a direct connection from the Hilton Doubletree to Canary Wharf. And it has improved markedly, including, I think, a specific cross-river fare that is lower than the standard fare for the riverboat service. But clearly, we would want to ensure that regular option is something that residents, cyclists travelling through the area as well as living and visiting there can rely on. And if that option is not reliable going forward, then we would want to look at what alternatives are in place. And clearly, if it is working, then whether that model could be applied in other parts of the river as well.
Thank you very much. And yes, Assemblymember Prince wants to come back.
Thank you, yeah. Commissioner and Seb, actually, on the Silvertown Tunnel, in relation to cyclists, I believe the initial proposal had that there would be specialised buses going through the tunnel to provide extra provision for cyclists. Is that still the plan, or has that been lost in the process?
It's not been lost in the process. It's one of the options being looked at.
Thank you very much. Right, so we need to move on to another section. However, we've all been sitting here for a long time. I'm now going to call for a comfort break for all. I'm going to give us 10 minutes just because there is an event on and the facilities might be quite clogged up, not literally, at the moment. So I'll give us until 5 to. Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you, members and members of the public, for sticking with the Transport Committee today. We are now going to resume our questions. We're moving on to questions about the bus network to the Deputy Mayor for Transport and the Commissioner for Transport for London. And Assembly Member McCartney is going to start with these questions.
Yes. My first question is on your bus action plan. Now, when the negotiations with government were taking place over funding, it was said that the bus action plan was at real risk. And then I think when the settlement was finally agreed, the statement was that you could now get on and deliver it. But can you deliver it to the same extent, and are there current limitations on it because of the funding deal that has been done?
You're absolutely right. When we launched it, we didn't have the certainty of funding that or the greater certainty of funding that we now have. I would say our bus action plan is quite an ambitious plan. It covers quite a long period of time and goes beyond the period of funding that we have. So the entire bus action plan is not yet funded, but nonetheless it's enabled us to make progress going forward. The positive is we can absolutely move forward on a number of the safety initiatives within it. I mentioned earlier that I was at Bexley Heath yesterday looking at the bus with the latest safety enhancements on there, and we're keen to roll that out on all new vehicles going forward. We're also, a key element, as I said in my opening comments, is around how we make our services more appealing for customers to use on a more regular basis. So we are putting a number of enhancements into our buses from a customer perspective, whether that's everything from USB charging facilities through to one which I think is probably the biggest game changer is real-time customer information in a same style as you see on the Elizabeth Line trains, for example. So as a bus gets near to rail service, it'll give the latest update on the rail service or on the tube network or whatever it may be, which of course is all about ensuring our customers are as well informed as possible regarding any service status or changes. We're clearly doing a lot of work around how we make the bus network more integrated with the wider transport network. This has been one of the biggest advantages of the reorganisation that the previous Commissioner did, putting all operations under one area and looking to see how we can maximise the value and the benefit for transport users in London. So, and of course, the environmental aspects. All buses in London now are low or zero emission. We are keen to work with government, which is one of the reasons why the Minister came to visit Bexley yesterday, was to see how we can make progress to potentially accelerating getting to an all zero emission bus fleet by 2030. There are some significant challenges in that, not least of which the volume of buses required not only in London but across the UK is significantly greater than the manufacturing output in the UK currently, and I'm starting to engage with the bus manufacturers to see how we can accelerate that. We're keen for the bus manufacturers to adopt a lot of the TfL standards as part of their standard bus design as well. So I'd say I think it's an ambitious plan. We've got some greater certainty now on some elements of it which we can deliver. We've touched on things like fatigue and pedestrian safety. We will look to prioritise those as much as we can, but we don't have the full plan funded to the end of the timeline that we're looking at.
Okay, so what do you need to do to get that plan funded, and what will drop off or what will not get done? At the moment, I wouldn't want to say what won't get done, because obviously it's an ambitious plan stretching a number of years forward. My priority is to make sure we can get the funding through that. The best way to do that will be to get our own financial sustainability delivered, to get our ridership up so we can increase our income, so that our income will then enable us to fund
the bus action plan going forward, because of course it's, other than the zero emission buses, not all of it is capital funding. It's through how we fund through non-capital means. So that's my priority, and see how we can do that through ourselves. If there's any support from the GLA, that would be much appreciated. But our intent is that we will fund that ourselves, with the exception of the capital funds, which would be part of our long-term capital funding request of government.
Obviously, under the last Mayor of London, we lost our substantial bus subsidy. Is there any talk about going back to some sort of subsidy for our bus network? I don't know whether Seb's perhaps best to answer that, or...
So clearly the critical thing here is to deliver on as many of the aspects of the plan as possible. And where, as Andy said, if there's not enough funding from that TfL has available, then clearly we would need to think about alternative funding options, which obviously the GLA would look at what resources it has, and clearly that consideration would have to be made. Ultimately, this is about delivering an improvement to something that is not just a vital network for people at the moment, but also the potential new network for people who perhaps at the moment don't feel confident in the reliability or the safety or the frequency and so on of the bus network. And we want the bus network to be the option for many, many more people, not just in outer London, but clearly that's where a lot of the focus will be. And it's imperative we deliver this. And as Andy has pointed out, the aspects of the plan, such as the electrification of the fleet, are important, not just on immediate environmental grounds. Obviously, it has a huge impact on air quality, also user experience, I should say. But it will have a tremendous impact on TfL's carbon emissions. This one measure alone will save a huge proportion of TfL's carbon emissions. So it's really important that we don't lose sight of the relatively small, and electrifying the fleet is not a small action, but compared to halving our carbon emissions, you think that the impact of what we can do is much bigger. With relatively small measures, you can actually achieve a lot. So the funding for this is essential, and we would look at what options are available. I can't obviously say whether or not a particular funding model will be agreed on, and we will want TfL to do as much with its own resources as it can, but we would certainly look at what's possible.
Okay. If I may add as well, one thing I also should have talked about is we have got the funding and do plan to introduce 25 kilometres of additional bus lanes by March 25, 10 kilometres of which will be delivered by March 24 as well. So that's obviously a key element around improving bus journey times, as well as improving the road infrastructure too. Yeah.
You talked earlier, Andy, about giving real-time information to bus users, and I find that very helpful. But Travel Watch has just put out a report today, which is actually about ticket buying. But in that they say that 1 in 6 Londoners don't have the digital means to buy an online ticket or to whatever. So that would similarly apply to being able to have real-time information. And I know TfL have always said that when those countdown notices get taken down, they get replaced, but actually they don't, and I've got quite a few instances in my constituents that hasn't taken place. So along with this, have you got any further plans to improve that real-time information so people don't have to rely on digital phones?
Improving accessibility across our network is a priority for us. I think there's been a lot of focus around step-free access, obviously particularly on the tube network, but actually for me it's around wider accessibility for those who have other disabilities or accessibility needs. We're just rolling out, off the top of my head, 300 new real-time bus information systems on bus stops, because bus stops traditionally have not had any real-time information. The TfL Go is obviously another opportunity. I think I will take an action away to review how we make this information more readily available for those with who may be visually impaired or don't have access to digital technology, to see how we can provide that through alternative means. I'm not an expert in this field, so I need to talk to some of the team to see what more we can do. And obviously, we have a very good relationship with Transport for All, so any ideas and suggestions, I haven't seen their report, but we'll obviously look at that in detail and see where there's opportunity for us to improve.
Yeah, so when you say 300 new is that replacing existing
No, this is new technology. So countdowns are traditionally in bus shelters.
Yeah.
And they're dot matrix type information linked to our iBus network. We're going through a tender at the minute to replace our iBus system with the next generation, which will improve that capability. But no, I can send you some examples post-committee of what it is, but these are real-time information. In some cases, they're displayed immediately below the bus flag. In other cases, they're displayed sort of mid-height on the bus stop itself, and they give real-time information about where the next buses are due to stop at that bus stop, which we've never had before. It's new.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Seb?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add to that, because I think the principle here is important. So it might be that individual dot matrix signs are not being replaced, although certainly they shouldn't be removed until the alternative is there. But where that is happening, it's because there's a technological transition taking place, and as Andy's outlined, some of the new signage is in a much more accessible place. And I think this serves two functions. The principle is essentially that we want the timers on at the bus stops, because yes, people will, many people will be able to access on an app the bus arrival times as they plan their journey to the bus stop, perhaps. But it provides two things. Not only does it provide information for those who don't have apps and who are digitally excluded, but it also provides reassurance for those who do. And it's actually quite an important part of the travelling experience to be able to have that reassurance and feeling that the network is there and managed, and that you have all the information at your disposal to make plans on your journey.
Good, thank you. Now, the committee last year did an investigation into the bus network, and one of the recommendations was to make improvements to future consultations, particularly with regards to including vulnerable Londoners. So can I ask what steps you're making on that? What new things are you going to do, not only around your consultations, but in your engagements more generally with Londoners?
First time this morning. Last time I attended the committee was right in the middle of the bus consultation. I'm relatively new into the COO role. I think, that was the largest consultation that I believe TfL had undertaken. We've done a review of that consultation and the lessons learned from it. As the committee will know, and the committee recommended, we did extend the duration of that. We're also doing some work around how can we make consultations of that nature, regardless of the subject, more accessible and more available to Londoners who have accessibility needs. We can write to the committee and say what we've done as a part of the lessons learned and how we're planning to move forward in terms of future consultations.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, because we had instances, for example, around the need to co-design bus routes or buses or whatever it is, but with those people. We also heard some of the consultation was inaccessible.
Yeah.
For example, the RNIB said that even your digital maps and formats were actually very inaccessible for those who had sight issues. So that would be very helpful. And can I ask again, what discussions are you having with London Travel Watch and other user groups around a better way to communicate with bus users?
So we have a good relationship with London Travel Watch. In fact, Louise Cheeseman, our Director of Buses, and Tom Cunnington at the London Travel Watch Board, as we sit here now, engaging with them, in particular to update on buses. I haven't met Michael, the new CEO, yet, but he's had 2 or 3 meetings with a number of my ExCo colleagues already, notably Glyn Barton, our COO, and if he hasn't done yet, I think the intent is to get some time with both Alex Williams and myself, because London Travel Watch obviously are a significant advisor to us and represent London. So I'm really keen that we listen to their views. We won't necessarily always agree on everything, but they add some real value that we have a record of acting on. So I'm really keen to work and grow the relationship with Michael as the new CEO.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've lots of members with further questions on the buses. So first of all, Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you very much. And of course, Travel Watch is something that the Assembly funds and the Transport Committee appoints the board and so on. So we have a relationship with them as well. Some very specifics on buses. So in your lovely update on your action plan that went to one of your board committees or is going to one of your board committees, it talks about Sutton whole area trial, 100 new electric buses, schedule improvements, etc. Tell us what this exciting new whole area trial is in Sutton, please.
So, Pigeon, I'll need to come back on the specifics on that because I don't have the detail to hand. But as we were chatting earlier, I have been and met the leader of Sutton and the leadership there. Had a very productive, nearly 2 hours with them, and that was on the back of some of the leadership having been taken to a local bus garage in Sutton where. I'll need to confirm the number, but I think it's in the order of 89 new electric buses are due there over the coming months. And Sutton are very keen to work with us on how we publicise those new buses so that we can raise awareness on the customer enhancements as well as the zero emission capability. Sutton, there are a number of route enhancements that we're implementing and looking at. Of course, the cancer hub down there is an important location as well, and there's some changes being made around that too. But in terms of the detail, I'll need to write to you afterwards, if I may.
Lovely, thank you. It's going to the Customer Service and Operational Performance panel on the 22nd. Demand responsive buses. 2 trials of these, one in Ealing, one in Sutton, very popular, very good with certain demographics. Are you looking at how you could revisit those in outer London, particularly given you have the expansion of ULEZ coming up?
So the leader of Sutton raised this with me directly. The trials that were done previously proved to be very costly and, in TfL's opinion, not great value for money in terms of the average cost per passenger. We will. I wasn't involved in the trial. I've asked to look at the findings of the trial of both the schemes to really assess, particularly in light of the ULEZ expansion, whether or not we should revisit it and see if there's a better way of doing it. But based on the initial results, the initial findings are that it wasn't a good value for money option. But I say I've asked to look at the results of the trial for myself because I wasn't involved with it.
It was hugely popular. You may say the cost, and I understand you might want to look at that, but it was hugely popular and had huge benefits with particular groups, particularly people with learning difficulties, older people, and people said they would use that rather than their car. Well, given that some people won't have a car they'll be able to use after August, actually this could be timely to try it again, a revised version.
So as I say, we're going to look at the response. The overall passenger numbers were low. So I agree, based on what I've been told, is that it was popular with those who used it. Some of those who used it did come off normal bus services as well, so there was a direct impact there. And the other thing I have also talked to Sutton about is whether or not there's the opportunity for us to maximise the dial-a-ride service that we have, because we don't think that's particularly well utilised in the Sutton area. We think there may be more opportunity there. So for me, it's around looking at the response to the trial on demand responsive, see where that lies with our standard bus service, and also how it fits in with the dial-a-ride provision as well, which we're extending the operating hours to till midnight each day as well.
And when are you going to be extending that? Because obviously I raised that with the Mayor in December. We've then discussed it. I've met with Seb and discussed it. I have been told, and you published that it was going to be beginning of April. I'm now told that's delayed. So when can we expect the extended hours of dial-a-ride?
Well, I'll come back to you on that because I thought it was beginning of April. So
I've just been told it's been delayed and they can't give us a time.
Okay, I will follow up on that.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Pigeon. Assembly Member Rogers, you're next in the line.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, you touched briefly on the 25 kilometres of additional bus lanes. Are you able to, I won't ask you to do it now, but to write to us with the information you have available about where those will actually be?
Certainly can on the first 10 kilometres, which are due by the end of 24, and if we have the detail for the remaining 15, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And speaking of the bus network in London, can you update us on the work to improve bus provision in outer London ahead of ULEZ expansion on the 29th of August?
Yeah, so we've done an awful lot of work around how we can improve bus provision around outer London. I think it's fair to say a lot of the focus in the last few years has also been around inner London. We've already announced an additional 1 million kilometres as part of the Mayor's announcement earlier. We're working through how we can extend some existing services. We're looking at some consultation, some consultations already started around some new routes and new provision. And I'm pretty confident that we'll be announcing some further enhancements in the coming days and weeks, which I hope will reassure people in outer Londons around a better and enhanced bus service.
Thank you. And just for clarity, could you let us know how many new routes you're already consulting on, and how many new routes you're planning on bringing in?
Probably best if I write back to you with the detail on that. Okay.
Ballpark figure? We're talking dozens or single figures?
I think it's in the order of 15 to 20.
15 to 20, okay. And would any of those new routes be classified or classed as orbital routes, like the X26, for example?
So we're looking at options around that. The X26, as you know, is a very popular route that cuts across or connects 5 boroughs and, of course, links to Heathrow. So it serves a number of purposes, not only connecting boroughs, but also taking predominantly Heathrow Airport workers, but also some airline passengers to the airport. I think it's a really good service. I think there's opportunity for how we can mirror that elsewhere in London. So we're reviewing the options around that.
That's good. If that were to be mirrored elsewhere, I think that'd be much welcomed. As you say, it's a popular route, and I think it performs a valuable service. Those 15 to 20 new routes that you're hoping to bring in, do you which boroughs are going to be served by those? Or maybe that's something you're going to have to write to us with.
I think it's probably best if we cover it all in one response to the committee.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions to you, Andy, prompted by questions from my colleagues. So just carrying on from where Assemblymember Rogers left off, can you give me additional information about outer East London and enhancing bus services? I mean, I think you gave some information in the last meeting, but is there anything more you can add to what you told me already? Something particular of the Dagenham and sort of Havering areas.
I think probably best, if I may, if
you can write to me.
Include it all as part of the response. Otherwise, it's probably riskier.
Sure.
I'll give some misinformation inadvertently.
No, never a good thing. And secondly, I think Assemblymember McCartney asked you about bus shelters and information for travellers. Sort of struck me, why don't we have bus times information at all bus shelters, and particularly the ones that are heavily used? So, for example, the one opposite Eastham Station, which is very heavily used, which I use myself almost every day, and there's no indicator system there at all. There must be a logic to it, I'm sure, but...
Well, I'd like to think there is, but I mean,
or lack of it.
Ideally, I would like to get to a place where we could provide real-time bus information at all bus shelters and bus stops. We have to recognise there are tens of thousands of them across the city. So let me take, if the committee has any specifics where we think there is a lack of information, then I'll talk to the team to see. It might be we've had to remove it because of a fault, or I don't understand why it wasn't there, but let me take that away.
I won't labour this point, but I think I've been using the bus for years now, and I can't recall seeing the one opposite Eastham Station for some years now, whereas there's another bus stop much further down the road, which is not that heavily used at all. Right. Well, it is used, but not next to the Eastham is used. But there is an indicator. So anyway.
Let me take that away, because
I'll leave it in your capable hands.
It's clearly illogical not to have real-time bus information at the most heavily used bus stops or bus shelters, so let me take that away.
Could I just to add to that, I think it was Assemblymember McCartney who mentioned the concept of co-design earlier. I think this is a really important aspect of the work that we do with disability groups and other stakeholders to ensure that we get the standards, the design standards right, and the usage patterns right as well, so that we can plug the gaps with proper accessible information that is useful to passengers where they need it. And I think perhaps probably, and this is not TfL, this is common across all organisations, there's been an approach where you design things and then go out to consultation and test things, and clearly sometimes that works and it does improve things, but the concept of co-design is where we work from the very beginning with stakeholders to ensure that we get the entire process right, and I think that's a very important way of working going forward.
Are you finished? I'm just waiting. Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Prince.
In the interest of time, I'll let it go.
Okay, I have one follow-up of my own, just on the again back to real-time information and countdown boards. I think you spoke about adding new ones, 320, 300,
Yeah.
321. Okay. We know they've been being taken away. I mean, Assembly Member Desai just pointed to one that used to be there and has been disappeared. There's a number in my own part of London as well like that. When you say you're bringing in new ones, are they going to eventually lead to a net gain versus what we had before, or are they simply just replacing what we got used to previously?
So the new ones that I refer to are brand new, being put in locations where there's been no countdown real-time information before. They're predominantly on bus stops, so there's never been any real-time information at bus stops prior to this. The countdowns, which are the red DMI type displays, I need to talk to Tim to understand if they're not being replaced because it's an availability of the parts, because the iBus system is being replaced. So it might be that as that system is becoming obsolete, that we need to wait for the new...
they've been being removed for years.
But I don't know the details, so let me come back to the committee on this. But my understanding is, as we put the new iBus system in, that will enable us to put new countdown linked to that. But
sure, but I'm saying over years and years and years, we've been losing these. You know, they break down, they don't get replaced. It's not a priority. I've had a number of different reasons given back for why they've gone.
Let me take it away. I suspect it's due to an obsolescence issue and that we can't get spares, but I will need to confirm that.
And you will prioritise those locations for the new technology. How is that being rolled out?
So the new technology is specific for bus stops. It doesn't replace the DMIs in bus shelters.
No, I understand that. I've seen the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's the things inside the bus. And there's a technical term for the flag on the bus. There's a kind of iPad thing that's attached to the bus stop again. So that's a little to replace the old timetables, I guess. And then on the shelters, there's a display along the side of a shelter. So that's a specific shelter thing. So you're going to be rolling those out in various ways and in various places. What's the criteria for that? Is it prioritising places that lost previous real-time information first, along with bus stops along that route? Is that how it's being done?
I'll write to the committee and confirm this. My understanding is the bus stop is brand new capability for locations that have never had real-time information. The red bus shelter information, I think, is an obsolescence issue, but I'll need to confirm.
But there's a new bus shelter provision in the things we've seen on the 63 route.
That's primarily on bus stops, I think, but let me come back to the committee and confirm.
Yeah, can we have more information on that? Because we've seen some nice pictures and we don't really know what's going to come and when.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
will do.
And people who were sore about losing the previous red countdown things would really appreciate those being replaced.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, my ideal would be to be able to provide real-time information everywhere. We need to make sure that heavily used bus stops, bus shelters have the real-time information. We need to make sure that those have had equipment there before and don't have some form of replacement. I don't know the details, so let me come back to you on that.
Okay, great. And just to add, finally, when you outline the benefits of real-time information, you outlined benefits for, I think, people who were taking the bus already, primarily. And I think one of the real benefits of real-time information on bus stops is that it can also be seen by people who are not already planning to take the bus.
I totally agree. You know, for me, it's around encouraging people to use the bus. So it's not just those who are already users.
Yeah.
You know, what our ideal would be, our existing users use the buses more frequently, and those who've not used the buses start using the buses and then realise what a great experience it is.
Exactly, and we've argued for ages that the removal of the countdown information was poor for behaviour change purposes as well as for the service to the users.
I agree. I need to come back to the committee on why that is. I don't think it's an active decision to remove it.
I've probably got some words I can show you about.
Okay,
that,
but
yeah.
my understanding is it's linked to obsolescence. But if that's not the case, I'll write to the committee anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're moving on to our second to last section of questions. Sean Bailey is asking questions about road user charging.
AKA A.M. Bailey. How are you doing? Deputy Mayor and Commissioner. I'm going to talk to you about road user charging along with some of my colleagues. But let me start with the scrappage scheme. Can you provide an update on the scrappage scheme? How many applications has TfL received? How many of those applications have been successful? And how much funding do you have left for the scheme?
So as you know, we have an overall fund of £110 million. I don't have the numbers to hand at the moment in terms of the latest stats, so we're still analysing those, so happy to share that with the committee afterwards.
Okay, that's good. Not to labour the point about bus shelters and information, but if you're only putting these new things on bus stops, aren't all the bus shelters in the more high traffic areas?
Well, as I say, I think the intent is to roll it out where we can. Most bus shelters will have the old DMI type, but yeah, as I said, I'll write to the committee explaining how we're going to do that.
But please do, because I sense the lack of a plan here. Chair, I'll go back to you, Chair, because he's going to have to provide the detail on my question in writing because he doesn't have it to hand.
Okay, yes, exactly. Yeah, we've noted that. A further commitment to provide information in writing. Assemblymember Garrett, you're next on the questions.
Thank you. Afternoon. If I could ask you, Deputy Mayor, about during the ULEZ consultation, I understand you were having sort of regular briefings and updates throughout that. I think they were weekly. Is that right?
I honestly can't recall off the top of my head how frequently we have meetings on ULEZ, but regularly, clearly.
With the team running the consultation and what was, how things looked so far, that sort of
thing. So, yeah, I believe this might be relating to questions that you've asked me before about what was seen and when, and clearly I've answered those questions before, and you've chosen to interpret them in your own way, and that's fine, you have that right, but...
I think you might be confusing me with Assemblymember Fortune. Who I believe asked you those questions.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've answered those questions before this committee in the past.
On which date did you answer those questions before this committee?
The last time I appeared before the Transport Committee, I believe.
Okay, Assemblymember Fortune doesn't sit on this committee. I don't know that he's been. I mean, I think you're possibly thinking of the plenary, perhaps. So, because my understanding is that you were having. And I say my understanding, what I mean is my knowledge based on freedom of information requests that we've seen, is that throughout the summer during the ULEZ consultation, you, Shirley Rodriguez, another deputy mayor, plus a whole lot of people from the mayor's team, including his chief of staff and various other senior people, plus senior people at TfL running the consultation, were having weekly updates. We've seen those updates. They had, the results so far, what the consultation responses have been on various questions. The consultation closed on the 29th of July, and then you had a final such briefing. I've seen all of those briefings, and they were quite similar, just updated each time with new numbers as the consultation went on. So it closed on the 29th of July, and then in early September you received a sort of final set of numbers. And then that was ahead of a meeting which I think was on the 28th of September, which also included the Commissioner and the Mayor and many other senior people. So at that meeting you were given what the results were so far on the ULEZ consultation, weren't you?
I honestly can't recall the number of meetings or the dates of the meetings that
were there
had.
Any meetings in which you were given results so far? Or final?
So I've been asked in the past, was I briefed on the results of the consultation? And at the time that I gave the answer, I had not seen the results of the consultation. I was not asked, did we have regular meetings on how the consultation was going, which yes, we did. But I mean, you wouldn't have had a full range of responses at any of those updates. I'm aware, obviously, that there is a JR at the moment on the wider question, and so I can't give any further answer than the answer I've already given. But to be perfectly clear, everything that has been asked so far has already been answered by me in previous sessions.
Well, perhaps. So on the 17th of November, I have the transcript here because I know sometimes memories can fail. So obviously these meetings are recorded and transcribed. So Peter Fortune asked you the question, just going back to the consultation that we are talking about, have you been briefed on the contents or the results of that consultation? And then you replied to clarify, are you referring to the consultation on the ULEZ expansion? Assemblymember Fortune, yes. And then you replied, no, I have not been briefed on the contents of that. That was on the 17th of November. But by that point, you had, by my count, close to 10 briefings on the consultation results as they were coming in.
Let me be very clear. I had not seen the results of the consultation at the point at which I was asked. So the answer I gave was correct.
I don't believe that's true, Deputy Mayor, because the briefing that you received in September,
believe it or not,
the briefing that you received in September contained the final public responses.
No, it didn't. I had not seen the final report that went to the Mayor, which was the basis on which he made the decision, and that is the question that I thought I was asked by Assemblymember Fortune, and it's the answer that I gave.
The question, no one mentioned, Assemblymember Fortune did not mention the report. You chose to interpret his question, which was, have you been briefed on the contents or the results of the consultation? You chose to interpret his question as being about a report, I believe, in order to conceal the fact that you had been briefed. So my question really is, why was it important for you in November to conceal the fact that you had lots of information about the results that had come in?
I didn't conceal anything. I would happily listed the number of meetings or whatever I'd had on ULEZ. I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that results means the results of the consultation, which I had not seen at the time.
The results of the consultation are the responses that people sent. So I think that the concern it leaves me with is, can I really believe anything that you're really answering in response to our questions, or are you just choosing to respond to an entirely different question which suits your own purposes? Does slightly undermine the purpose of the...
Again, results are results, and I had not seen the results. So you can believe what you want and say what you want about the answers I give. I can't help you in your interpretation of my responses.
Okay. So a document that has the word results on the front page and contains tables and bar charts and spreadsheets and so forth with the results of the answers to the questions that the Londoners have given in the consultation, your answer is that does not constitute results.
No, because the consultation was ongoing. So how could it possibly be the results if the consultation is ongoing?
No, it wasn't ongoing. It ended on the 29th of July, and that document was sent to you, I'm talking about now, in the first week of September, in relation to a meeting in the last week of September. So it wasn't ongoing, was it?
Well, I mean, in terms of the results as I interpret them are what are the end results and the report on the consultation. That's the only important thing to consider. That's the thing that the Mayor considered when he made his decision. And at the point that I was before the Assembly, I had not seen that.
So what further results came in after the 17th of November?
I'm sorry, I don't. There were no further results after the 17th of November, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, precisely. That's why there were no further. So your
again, I hadn't seen it. So
you'd seen it.
That was what I was asked.
On the 28th of September, you went to a meeting.
Assemblymember, can I just? I know. Sorry, I know this is how you like to work. You didn't ask for any time to be dedicated to these questions, and you didn't warn us they were coming. So can I ask you just now to give us an estimate of how much longer you would like in the time, so I can try and trim the rest of the agenda?
You have actually interrupted precisely at the point that I was finished.
Oh, it was really hard to tell. I was trying to sort of wait for a sign.
What I would point out is it's a 3-hour meeting.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine for you to have 5 minutes. You've had 5 minutes. That's, okay. I mean, that's fine.
After
that's
the 3-hour meeting, is that okay?
I just wondered if there was another 10 minutes coming.
So, moving on from, I think we've perhaps all reached our conclusion about the accuracy and veracity of the answers that were given in November. Moving on to, so let's assume that ULEZ goes ahead in August. What level of public transport improvements are we going to see by then to help people to make the transition from car to public transport, which is supposedly the objective or one of the objectives of the policy, Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, just to point out, I did obviously also write to the Assembly following up my appearance, which you probably saw, I hope.
I read it. I found it disingenuous, if I may say. I wasn't going to go back to it, but it didn't.
That's your right. In terms of the additional services, we've got an announcement that's been made by the Mayor that there will be an additional 1 million bus kilometres which will be delivered throughout this year in advance of August. We've got buses planned to serve large developments once necessary infrastructure is in place in Barnet, Ealing, Harrow, Haringey. There will be extensions and reroutings to various bus routes in Southall and around Battersea, the Olympic Park, Wandsworth, Riverside, and serving Springfield Hospital. There will be improvements in Havering, in Barnet, Southall, Harrow and Wealdstone, Haringey and Wanstead, and I believe the Commissioner will be updating the committee with further information on those routes in due course.
Okay. I didn't hear anything there for my residents in Croydon and Sutton. Did I miss that?
So we've already touched on some of the Sutton.
Well, those are replacing existing buses with electric buses, which is good for clean air. It's not improving people's transport options.
But I also said there would be detail in my response to the committee about the additional services.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that being comprehensive and impressive. The million bus kilometres that we hear a lot about, Deputy Mayor, is that a lot of buses? Does that sound like a lot, do you think?
Yeah, it's a lot. Clearly, delivery of any additional bus services at a time when financial restraints are what they are is difficult, but I'm pleased that we're able to do this, and I'm pleased that we're able to focus on outer London. Clearly, in many parts of central and inner London, bus patronage has declined, and it's declined largely because of the increase in other options and availability and frequency and reliability. Improvements to the tube service, improvements to London Overground services, for example, have provided direct alternatives for a lot of people in central and inner London. That is clearly not the case for many people in outer London, and that's why I think it's right that we concentrate the expansion of the bus network into outer London. And in addition to the additional 1 million kilometres announced ahead of August, the Mayor has committed to fund an additional 1 million kilometres on top of that as well. So okay. I think it's a good start to what should be the long-term objective of any Mayor and any Commissioner, which is to extend the density and frequency of services in outer London.
Sure. So 1 million extra kilometres as a percentage increase in buses. Do you know what that is?
Not off the top of my head. Obviously, we have the largest bus network, I think, in the world, certainly in Europe. It doesn't compare to any service, if you think of any
Sorry,
big...
I'm conscious of time. I don't want the Chair to deem
Sure.
my questioning because you're talking
No,
about
I think it's important to contextualise the increase. So we have an incredibly dense, big network already.
Yes.
And what we want to do, obviously, is increase the density and provision of options in outer London, which is what the announcements on the additional bus routes are.
So if you round it to the nearest whole percent, it's a 0% increase.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to round down to 0%, by all means, but I think...
well, it's 0.21% is what I calculated out.
The figures speak for themselves. I think 2 million additional kilometres of bus coverage is a significant figure, whichever way you look at it.
I don't think
and it has to be contextualised in what is the largest bus network in the world.
Sure. I mean, I'm attempting to contextualise it. I think, going back to my previous discussion about how I think about your answers, I think it's perhaps not a coincidence that you haven't calculated the percentage, because it's so unimpressive. You talked about an additional million, which takes us to 2 million bus kilometres. That's still, by my reckoning, 0.41% increase, which, again, to the nearest whole percent is still 0%. No one's really going to notice that, are they? That's not a noticeable improvement in public transport in order to entice people away from cars, which is your stated policy.
I think, if I may, Assembly Member Garrett, I think in the context of the total kilometrage we have, it isn't that big. But the bus network is heavily concentrated on inner London. In the context of the changes we're making to outer London, it's clearly a greater percentage. And this is work that we've put in place since the Mayor made the decision on ULEZ. So I think we have moved quickly to see what we can do in the relatively short time before ULEZ goes live. We're working on what we can do beyond the go-live date, and clearly we've got more in the pipeline, particularly as Silvertown comes into place, which will create further opportunity, and we will continue to have a focus on what we do in outer London. So I think in the context of looking at in terms of the outer London kilometrage, it's clearly a greater percentage.
Okay. I mean, I guess you can add yourselves to the list of people caught on the hop by the Mayor's short notice announcement that it's expanding and not giving enough people time to prepare. In terms of improvements for my constituents, again, I'm not conscious that there's anything. Some of the transport upgrade projects in Croydon and Sutton that have been discussed for a long time, tram extension in Sutton, tram extension in Croydon, frankly, even just a tram capital maintenance upgrade for the existing trams in Croydon. Where are we with those?
So we have assessed the life of the existing tram fleet, the original tram fleet. You'll be aware there's a second, much smaller fleet which was purchased later. We believe that the existing tram fleet will become beyond its useful economic life towards the end of this decade. We believe there's a sound business case to replace the tram fleet. We don't have funding for that at the moment. We will include this as part of our long-term capital funding request of government going forward, but we have a strong desire and need to replace the tram fleet. In terms of further expansion of the tram network, that currently the business case I think that was looked at pre-pandemic has been put on hold. At the moment, there's no. We don't believe there's it's good use of funds at the minute to look at expanding that. Clearly, if the time is right, then we'll review that business case. But at the moment, there's no plans to extend the tram network.
And if the decision were made even today to expand it, I mean, it would be what, 5 or 6 years before the first passenger were on those services, something like that.
I'm not close enough to it, but typically, if you look at most line extensions, it's between 4 to 6 years. In other examples.
Okay, so we're probably going to have ULEZ and maybe even road user charging before we see any of those big upgrades in my constituency.
So tram fleet, ideally we would like to have the new tram fleet from 2028, if we can make that. The existing tram service, I think the teams do a very good job there, it delivers a good service. But at the moment, there's no business case that justifies the expansion of the tram network at the moment compared to other cases.
Okay. Just quickly on the trams, what I would say is that I think we're already noticing gaps in service, which when I've inquired at TfL, it is because they're struggling to field a full fleet of trams on some days, which is creating gaps. So I think it's more urgent than your...
So that's been linked to supply chain issues, linked to the pandemic, and the current issues linked to supply of materials as a result of the economic situation, particularly around wheel sets. And we're working very closely with our supply chain partners on that. Tram availability has improved recently. We did have a period in the autumn where particularly some of the branch services didn't have as frequent a service. I met with the leader of Croydon just a couple of months ago, and we discussed this issue as well. And our team are very focused on making sure we improve the reliability and availability.
So you think you can tackle that problem without the big full capital refresh that we mentioned a moment ago? So you think that's solvable without that big capital spend?
Absolutely. This is an ongoing maintenance issue and supply chain issue that a number of sectors are seeing as a result of impact of Brexit, impact of Ukraine war, and availability of materials. So it's an unfortunate but ongoing maintenance issue that we don't need long-term capital funding for. We just need to work with the supply chain to get the availability of spares.
Okay, and finally, I asked the Mayor a couple of weeks ago at Mayor's Question Time about whether money from ULEZ, which of course is disproportionately raised in Outer London constituencies just such as my own, could be then disproportionately spent in those areas rather than just reallocated to existing spending, which is largely not in my constituency. He seemed to make an offer that he would go away and look at it. What's been looked at so far?
So from a TfL perspective, obviously we've got a priority of what we'd like to invest in for the future. I can't give you any specifics around what income from ULEZ would be spent on what, but any income from ULEZ will be invested back into the public transport network. If there are specific cases that clearly deliver value for money, then we'll look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Sure. You appreciate what that sounds like for my residents, though, is that they're paying ULEZ and somebody else is getting some upgrades and improvements elsewhere.
Well, my responsibility is to hold the transport network, and I need to focus on where the priorities are. And if there's a specific case in Outer London, then clearly we'll look at that and prioritise accordingly.
Deputy Mayor, perhaps then it's a political question. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've given quite a lot of commitment on the need for increasing density of the network in Outer London. That is clearly an aim of this administration. I think it's a long-term aim of TfL as well. You know, we want to get to a situation, I think we all here want to get to a situation where the transport, public and active transport options in Outer London are as dense, are as available, are as varied, affordable, reliable, etc. and safe as they are in central and inner London. And that's the goal to which we strive. We're driven by the MTS. The MTS has the overall target of 80% of all journeys across London by active and public transport, and that includes, of course, outer London. So anything and everything we can do to improve that within the realms of what is doable in terms of funding and everything else, then that will be our goal.
Okay, my observation would be you've more or less echoed the Mayor's answer to the same question I asked him last July, and from where I'm sitting, it does look a lot like talk and not action, but I look forward to written answers with big, long lists of action that my residents can look forward to.
Watch this space.
I'm sure I will be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now we need to move. I'm afraid we'll have to not ask the rest of the questions in that section because we do owe some time to our final section.
Excuse me, Chair, so you mean we're not going to ask the rest of my questions?
I'm afraid as Chair I've got to manage the meeting, so we get
Chair,
through
you've
things.
asked a whole load of questions.
We can
and
spend
I've
time
asked
arguing
one.
about it, but I do have the discretion to do that as Chair.
So you have the discretion to remove my questions but ask multiple questions yourself?
Yeah, we've got another section that doesn't have any time currently allocated
I
to it
understand,
at
Chair, but
all.
I'm one of the
And
members
we
who
have
has not had
now
multiple time and elongated your meeting.
14 minutes
I consider
left
that very
in the
unfair.
meeting. It is unfair, and I said I was sorry. That's the first thing I said, Assemblymember Bailey. So, Assemblymember Sheikh, we have some questions on rail, and you are to begin. And can we keep it quick because we do have less time than we originally thought for this section as well?
Will do, Chair. Several train operating companies have declared timetable changes for 2022, which are going to result in delays and cancellations. So, Seb, I just wanted to start off by asking you, how does TfL plan to mitigate against service disruption in 2023 and 2024 as a knock-on effect?
Yeah, thank you. We do have coordination meetings, closure coordination meetings with all the rail operators in London, and that includes our own services as well. So London Underground and Network Rail are in continual discussions to minimise the number, the size and the impact of closures. And we are obviously mindful of the impact that has on passengers who quite rightly don't make the distinction between ownership and delivery of services when planning their journey. And we do have a number of actions in place when, for example, Network Rail services are disrupted by industrial action. So we do have a commitment from Network Rail to enable London Underground to operate where there's shared infrastructure. During strike days, a core hour service of 7:30 to 6 p.m. And clearly, any and every instance of disruption is regrettable, and we would always urge the government to sit down with operators to try and resolve this as much as possible.
I would echo that advice. And just to build on that a little bit, so could you just tell me a little bit more about the impact it's having currently on TfL services? Because obviously we've seen, unfortunately, a decline in systematic, there's been systematic underfunding of suburban rail, and we've got lots of residents contacting us about the cuts, the train cancellations and the infrastructure failures. So how is that playing out in TfL services at the moment?
And then I'll pass to the Commissioner just to give a more detailed answer on the direct impact, but just to say that TfL could have taken the decision to reduce services during the pandemic on the services that they operate, and very rightly took the decision not to do that. In contrast, I think, to many train operating companies who would have come under enormous pressure to cut services and consequently did. And I think the impact of cutting services is now there to be seen, that when demand returns, if the services aren't running to the same frequency as before, it impacts reliability, impacts confidence of the travelling public. And I think that then has a knock-on impact. Clearly, when there are fewer people travelling into London, that has an impact on London's economy as a whole and on TfL. But maybe the Commissioner would like to say a bit more about that.
Commissioner, can I just tie in another question just to save us time in your answer? Just in regards to the newly ratified 23-24 budget, are there funds that TfL can utilise to address these service cancellations?
I guess there's two elements to this. One is cancellations which are caused by Network Rail infrastructure or industrial action. I'm clearly delighted, I'm sure the committee is, to see that the RMT have now accepted Network Rail's offer around pay and terms and conditions. So that now removes the threat of industrial action on Network Rail, which did impact both the Elizabeth line, the Overground and some elements of the Tube network because of unavailability of signalling staff. So that is good news. Train operating companies, obviously, that's their own issues. That doesn't have any direct impact on TfL other than if they're not operating services into London, it has a direct revenue and ridership impact on us. I'm pleased, as part of paid discussions that Arriva Rail London had as the Overground and MTR had as the Elizabeth line, that those paid settlements were agreed much quicker than the wider, in fact they have been agreed, unlike the National Rail network. What we do is coordinate across our own network. As the Deputy Mayor said, is we've operated a pretty reliable service, I think, throughout the pandemic and beyond. There's no direct consequence other than our revenues when there's industrial action on the National Rail network from a train operating company perspective. Our focus is to make sure that we try and mitigate that whenever we can. The Elizabeth line has been a significant boost to the city, particularly when there has been industrial action. And in fact, last week we saw record numbers on the Elizabeth line as a result of the industrial action on the network.
Thank you. And I'm going to try and condense and combine questions. So there has long been expected a major set of rail ticket office closures. Has TfL or the Mayor made any inquiries about these closures, and what plans do you have that might relate to this, including, for instance, it'd be good to hear you comment on maybe the impact of reduction in paper ticketing as a justification for this?
So obviously we're not that close to the ticket office closure discussions that National Rail are having. Obviously the Tube closed all our ticket offices back in 2015, 2016. London Overground still has some ticket offices, but actually the number of transactions we have through ticket offices is very low. But it's a matter for National Rail. It doesn't have any direct consequence to TfL. In terms of what happens to ticket officers on National Rail.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just end with this final question to yourself, Seb. Nearly half of railway stations in London do not allow disabled passengers to turn up and go, unlike obviously TfL, Overground and the Elizabeth line stations which do. Should the government ensure that turn up and go is a minimum requirement for all train stations that are step-free?
The short answer is yes. Yeah, turn up and go is a hugely important part of independent travel. And whereas obviously many people will require direct assistance for their journeys to be complete, and that will necessitate ensuring that that assistance is there, many others would not necessarily require that assistance and would be able to avail themselves of facilities without planning. And that should be the norm, the standard. I'm pleased to say that some train operating companies are adopting this of their own accord, and I've seen it for myself that it's not, this is taking place on services that aren't run by TfL as well, but I would want the government to ensure that that is the norm and not the exception.
Fantastically. Well, let's hope yourself and TfL can continue pushing them in the right direction. Thank you, Chair.
I had previous indications from Assemblymember Prince and Assemblymember McCartney. Do you still have the question you planned?
Previous section.
Okay, great, okay. In which case, Assemblymember Bailey has gone. Would your group like to ask the remaining questions on road charging, seeing as that didn't take very long?
Yeah, I'll
go for it, Assemblymember Rogers.
So, this one... I think I'm going to address this to the Deputy Mayor. How will you, any kind of smart road user charging scheme would represent a gigantic sea change in the way that transport in London was ordered. We've heard, we've seen that there's been a lot of pushback against the way that the ULEZ expansion consultation was run. I don't think that you could introduce road user charging by doing the same kinds of things again. So how would you engage Londoners as plans towards road user charging develop?
Yeah, so just so we're very clear, we're not talking about existing road user charging schemes such as ULEZ, such as the LES. We're talking about any potential future replacement for those schemes.
Future smart road user charging scheme.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, clearly there have been several reports from various academics, experts, interest groups, and so on, as to the types of schemes that might be feasible. And clearly, it's worth having a discussion about what the potential future mix of road user charging might look like here or anywhere else in the country, for that matter. And I know the Assembly has had a look and discussed its own ideas on what those options might be. And I think that's very much the vein in which we would want to continue with Londoners as a whole, to have that very frank and open discussion about what the priorities would be. Is it, for example, the level of congestion at any particular time? Is it the type of vehicle, the emission standards, the time of day, the type of trip, etc., etc.? And you're right, it's not an easy thing to have this conversation, but I turn to my remarks at the beginning, which is, we are living through a time of extraordinary change where the impacts of decisions of the last decades have an extraordinary and profound impact on the world in which we live, and we're approaching a tipping point as to the kind of future that we want, whether we want a sustainable future or whether we want to continue with an unsustainable future. I think we all know what the answer is, but we disagree perhaps on how to get there. But what I would want and plead for is for a sensible discussion on what those options are. I appreciate that politics, and I've been an elected representative myself, I understand what it's like, and politics is a necessary part of the discourse in order to present alternatives. That's a very important part of our system. Another important part of our system, however, is transparency and frankness in discussions, and the ability to have a full discussion about the scale of the challenge we face. And given the scale of the challenge we face, I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about what the options would be going forward to ensure that we do bequeath a city that is livable, that is sustainable. And this won't just impact our children and our children's children. This will impact all of us.
You're sort of overshooting my point quite a way, which is I accept this. These are grand issues and big things we need to discuss. So then how will you have those discussions with Londoners? Because following the progress of the ULEZ expansion debate, it seems that when that decision was, or the plans were announced in March 2022, the discussion was pretty much within this building. Although the consultation was large, I think it was the largest TfL I've ever run, after the decision was finally made in November, it seemed that a whole load of people suddenly realised that this was going to happen. So clearly there hadn't been the wide engagement that was necessary. And road user charging, I worried that the same thing would happen on an even bigger scale, that this would take people by surprise. So how do you make sure that a change of this magnitude gets the kind of engagement and consultation that Londoners deserve?
It's a fair challenge, and I think in any policy change you're going to have people who weren't engaged in the preliminary processes, no matter what you do. Thank you for acknowledging the fact that it was the largest consultation that TfL undertook. It was also done in conjunction with a number of other reach-out activities, including, of course, direct stakeholder engagement, public polling, range of op-eds, and, of course, a very lively debate, let's face it, in the political sphere as well. So it's an issue that I think rightly has attracted a lot of attention. What I, again, would plea for is for there to be a correct representation of what the policy is, how long it's already been in place for, its impact, and what the potential impact might be, and for that public debate to happen in the spirit that all public debate should happen. And I would hope that we could do that in any other policy initiative. And that, by the way, doesn't just apply to road user charging, it applies to any major issue that affects the travelling public. Ultimately, this is about the kind of vision for the city we want. And yes, perhaps my answer was a little long, but because there is no concrete proposal or worked out plan on road user charging, I think it's a really good opportunity for us to have that conversation with Londoners about the type of city they want.
Thank you. I'm going to get in one last question very quickly, which is, can you confirm that any future TfL consultations around road user charging will be supported by published options analysis of any proposed schemes and the alternatives? Is that something, a commitment you can make?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'd have to consult the legal advice on what our parameters are in terms of running consultations, but it sounds like a reasonable request, and we'll certainly, if I'll get back to you in terms of whether or not we can commit to that specific request. But yes, I will certainly look at that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so to be clear, that does go slightly beyond your legal requirements to look at the options that you don't propose as well as the ones that you do, and it was one of our recommendations in relation to buses. I would add the question I didn't get to ask either, which is, should you not also be asking people what they want in terms of improvements to transport in outer London to reduce their car dependency? I had to establish earlier in the week that when you introduce a new bus route, you do have to consult in the same way as if you were going to cut one. And that is, so that people can suggest what would be more useful to them. And I think the whole of outer London, in relation to the ULEZ, but also because that's the area where they have the worst car dependency, deserves being consulted on what improvements would help them. And not just on the actual charging scheme. If it's just that, then you will face a lot of responses that you may not find very constructive. And speaking of large responses, the call for evidence to our own road user charging investigation has generated, I think, the biggest response to any call for evidence that the Assembly has seen before as well. So we will be sometime analysing that and coming forwards with our recommendations. But meanwhile, I think we're all kind of united on the need for really high levels of engagement on all of this, particularly from our experience with the bus consultations previously. But having said that, we do need to finish the meeting, and I have to speak at the event that's behind us in about 5 minutes. So I would like to thank you for your answers today. We have a few more items of business to deal with. They might take a bit longer than usual, so if you wanted to leave in the meantime, that would be fine. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any output arising? I think we have a letter to write in the very least. In relation to the work programme, can we note it? And can we authorise the chief officer or the person they delegate authority to engage an external recruitment agency to support the Assembly with the forthcoming London Travel Watch Board recruitment exercise up to a maximum value of £25,000 and make necessary arrangements and associated decisions up to the final stage of recruitment, where shortlisted candidates will be interviewed and appointment decisions made in liaison with Transport Committee party group lead members?
Agreed.
So that would take a minute. The next meeting of the committee will be confirmed at the London Assembly's annual meeting on the 4th of May 2023, and I've no urgent business, so thank you very much. I can close the meeting. Oh, well done.